I moved into the little bungalow on Woodland Drive in the fall, the air already turning crisp and the leaves a riot of orange and red. It was my first home since the divorce. I felt a sense of freedom, renting something modest but mine. I painted the walls a gentle gray, brought in an overstuffed armchair near the bay window, and placed a dozen plants around the living room. I could taste the beginnings of a new chapter. Things started subtly. I'd hear a creak in the hallway at odd hours, but I chalked it up to the old floorboards settling. Lamps flickered once, twice. I told myself the wiring was old, nothing more. Nights were quiet, and I fell into a routine. Wake up, walk my dog Luna, go to work at the marketing firm downtown, come home, cook something simple, flop into bed. It felt stable. One Thursday evening, I returned home with a bag of groceries: spinach, chicken thighs, strawberries, a bottle of red wine. The air smelled like winter was coming, faint chill, dry. Luna padded ahead of me up the wooden porch steps, ears perked at a soft rustle in a bush. I didn't pay much attention. We entered the house, the front door closing behind, and I set the bag down on the counter. When I glanced up, the bay window's blinds were slightly ajar, just a sliver of gap. I seldom opened that window. It faced the street and didn't draw much breeze. The gap made me pause. I pulled Luna close and approached the window cautiously. Outside, on the sidewalk, stood a man. He wasn't moving forward, just standing perpendicular to the window, hands in his pockets. He wore a heavy coat despite the mild temperature and a scarf obscuring most of his face. I held my breath. He looked up, his gaze fixed on the house. He didn't wave. He didn't walk on. He just stood there, like he was waiting. I blinked. He must have noticed I saw him. He turned and walked away slowly down Woodland Drive. I stared at his retreating form, heart hammering. I rushed to close the blinds. Luna whined and sat by my side. I locked every door and window, the hairs on my arms standing up. I felt foolish. Did he just stand outside my house, staring in? I texted my best friend Emma, telling her what happened. She suggested I call the police. I dismissed it, said probably just a weird guy, nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the memory of those dark eyes behind the scarf. Over the next weeks, the incidents multiplied. At night, I'd wake to Luna growling at the hallway. I'd get up, flashlight in hand, and sometimes find nothing but the empty corridor. One morning, I came down for coffee and found the front door unlocked. How? I was sure I locked it when I came home. The same day, I noticed my car door slightly ajar in the driveway, though I had parked it and locked it the previous evening. The glove compartment was open. Nothing missing. But the intrusion felt real. My neighbor, Mrs. Hopkins, a kindly older woman across the road, noticed I looked unsettled and asked if everything was okay. I said yes, shrugged it off. She took me for coffee at the corner cafe and told me she'd seen someone pacing across the street behind my house late at night. "It's the woods," she said. "People sometimes come from there. Best be careful." I thanked her and left. I felt silly. How many times can I worry about someone in the woods? But it lodged in my mind. One evening, after returning from an out-of-town marketing pitch, I parked my car in the garage and entered the house through the side door. Luna barking softly at something. The house smelled musty. The heat was on low. I noticed something odd. The kitchen light was on. I remembered turning it off before leaving. My bones chilled. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, the silence pressing in. I saw the tiny trash bin, its lid open, a used paper towel half hanging out. I looked around. On the counter next to the bread box lay a slip of paper folded neatly. My name, penned in black ink. "I see you." My fingers froze. I picked up the note, the paper cool and oddly heavy. No signature, no other words. I backed away. Luna jumped up on the counter, sniffing the note. I dropped it back and ran to the front door, locked it again. I found my phone and texted Emma, just one line: "It's real." Her reply came quick: "Call someone." I tried the police. The officer who came out was polite, took notes, suggested I keep a log of incidents, get locks changed if I felt unsafe. He said no signs of forced entry so far. The note was vague, didn't threaten me specifically, but they took it as an investigation. I changed the locks, installed a security camera by the front door, a simple one I could monitor via my phone. I felt a small sense of relief. Days passed with no new incidents, and I managed to relax a little. I began to doubt again. Maybe I was being paranoid, the product of my anxiety post-divorce. Then came the photographs. It was Sunday morning. I slept in while Luna lay curled beside me. I got up, poured coffee, looked at the camera feed on my phone. A man in a hooded jacket, dark jeans, the same heavy coat I'd glimpsed before, stood by the front gate. He looked directly at the camera. The timestamp, 3:02 a.m. The feed was grainy but unmistakable. I froze. He didn't stay long. He walked around the gate and away. I blinked. I rewound the footage. There he was again. My throat tightened with fear. Then I checked inside the house, walked through each room. Everything appeared untouched. But then I noticed something else. The lockbox on the shelving unit, where I kept spare keys hidden, was open, keys missing. I never used that key anyway. For a moment I thought I'd misplaced them, then realized the spare must have been taken. It made my heart pound with dread. Someone had entered when I wasn't there. I called the police again. This time the officer told me to stay at a friend's place if I didn't feel safe. I stayed with Emma for the night. I left the house in the morning with a heavy weight in my chest. When I returned that afternoon, the place felt hollow, violated. Luna sniffed at the door and whimpered. The next incident came fast. I was working late on a project. By the time I left the office, it was dark and raining lightly, November drizzle. I drove home slowly. The bungalow sat quiet beneath street lamps and damp leaves. I clicked my door remote twice, and the locks engaged. I opened the garage with my keypad, the same one I'd changed days before. I parked and entered the house. Both lights were off. I set down my briefcase. I heard a low shuffle from the living room. Luna snapped to alert, stood rigid facing the bay window. I turned slowly. Outside, someone moved behind the blinds. I spun the dim lamp on and looked out. No one on the porch now. But I noticed the blinds further parted than I'd left them. My breath stalled. I rushed to the window and yanked the curtains aside. The street was empty, but on the porch there was a single muddy footprint on the welcome mat, and in the yard, a slim metal object, a clip maybe, to secure shutters. I picked it up with a gloved hand. It wasn't mine. My hands shaking, I dialed 911. The dispatcher asked about weapons or entry. I said I didn't see anyone inside the house now, but I found the footprint and clip. When the officer arrived, he found no signs of forced entry. But they dusted the porch floor. They told me collecting footage from exterior cameras was crucial. I showed them the night feed of the man at the gate. They took my phone, file, said they'd send it to forensics. They suggested I consider staying elsewhere until they could establish more. I did. I booked a weekend in a cheap motel downtown. I collected important items from the bungalow: laptop, passports, documents, jewelry. I told Emma I might stay a few nights. She insisted I stay longer. I called my employer, told them I had an urgent personal situation, and asked for a few days off. They were supportive. I felt vulnerable, raw. On the second night at the motel, I had trouble sleeping. Every noise, the HVAC rumble, cars passing outside, set me on edge. At 2 a.m., I woke to a series of text messages. No phone number listed, just the word "found you." I sat upright. My phone screen glowed. I stared at it for a long second, then locked it. I didn't respond. Anxiety squeezed me like a vice. I called Emma, told her. She asked if I had the number. I said no. She said, "Save screenshots, share with police." I did. Morning came slowly. I packed my bag quickly and returned home with Emma's company. We drove there together. The bungalow looked the same from outside, quiet. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt the weight of the intrusion again. We wandered room by room. In the hallway drawer, half open, lay a single black glove, one fitting a right hand. Inside the glove was a folded strip of film, a camera film roll. I picked it up. Looking at it made my stomach turn. How had they gotten in? The security camera had been active. Nothing showed. I shut off the remaining drawers and returned to the living room. On the bay windowsill, someone had written in condensation, "See you soon." The letters were shaky, freshly made. I shuddered. I backed away, called the police again. When they arrived this time, I found myself unable to stand still. My heart hammered as they photographed the glove, the film roll, the writing. They asked if I knew of any enemies, any reason someone might target me. I said no. I was divorced, single, returning to work. They asked for persons of interest. I said none. They asked about ex-partner. The divorce had been amicable, but I mentioned nothing volatile happened. That night I slept at Emma's, bag packed for anything. The police told me to be cautious. Don't reveal your daily pattern online. Avoid walking the dog alone after dusk. Keep blinds closed. I felt fear crawling under my skin. The next day, I stayed home with Emma's cat visiting to keep me company. Mid-afternoon, the doorbell rang. Terrified, I looked through the peephole. A man in a uniform, badge clipped to his jacket. "City Wildlife Control," he said, voice polite. "We've had reports of a stray dog in the neighborhood. May I come inside to check your home and property?" I paused. There was no sign from the outside. I asked for ID. He handed a laminated card with a name, department. I noticed the badge looked cheap, the edges slightly worn. Something about it didn't feel right. Luna growled behind me. I thanked him, said I'd step outside to look around instead. I watched his face closely as he walked down the porch steps and left. The moment he left, I dashed to lock the door. I called the Real Wildlife Control Agency. They had no record of a team visiting my area. I reported the incident to the police. Now I realized the stalker was escalating. Impersonation. My breath felt heavy. That evening, I decided to stay at the bungalow anyway, thinking if I showed I wasn't terrified, maybe he'd stop. I closed all blinds, locked all doors from inside, set Luna's leash on the couch so I could grab her fast. I hovered near the bay window, watching the street for movement. At about 11:17 p.m., I heard something thunk against the front porch. I flicked the lamp on. The welcome mat moved slightly. I peered through the blinds. I saw a paper bag on the mat. I froze. I grabbed my phone and zoomed the camera at the porch. Inside the bag was a single tea light candle burning softly, the flame dancing. I swallowed hard. I considered calling the police immediately, but hesitated. What if he was still outside? I texted them and told them a package was on my porch. The operator told me not to touch it. They were sending someone. I stood by the window, heart pounding, watching the porch swirl in the lamplight. After 5 minutes, an officer arrived, gloved and cautious. They opened the bag and discovered just the candle. The bag folded at top. They said no fingerprints visible. They would process it later. They told me to remain at a friend's place again. I agreed. I stayed with Emma for days. Work got scary. I got emails from unknown senders, one with a single picture of my bungalow's exterior at dusk, another with Luna lying on the floor beside the bay window, the timestamp from the camera, 4:09 a.m. I printed the emails, forwarded to police. They looked into IP addresses, but they were masked. Then the call came. I was back at the bungalow one weekend when I heard a knock. It was quiet, soft, deliberate. I walked to the front door, looked through the peephole. There stood the man in the heavy coat from before. He held a small package behind his back. I froze. I stepped back, but he opened the door latch and turned it. The door jiggled but didn't open fully. My heart pounded. He said in a low voice, "Just thought you might like this." His face was partially obscured, but his eyes fixed on me. I didn't answer. I closed the door and locked it again, dialing 911. I told them the man tried to enter. He left immediately and vanished down the street. The dispatcher told me not to confront him again, stay safe inside until officers arrived. I retreated to the living room, pressed my back against the wall, doubled up by Luna. When the police came, they found no signs of forced entry, but took the package from the front steps anyway. Inside, it was just a small porcelain figurine, an animal, maybe a rabbit. Cute, but out of place. I felt sick. Why send me a gift? I asked the officer. He shrugged. To a stalker, a gift can be the same as a threat, he said. I nodded. I installed motion sensors, upgraded the camera system so I could monitor the property live. I changed my routine, walked Luna only during daylight, had a friend accompany me if I left after 9 p.m. I told my boss I might take a temporary leave if it didn't calm down. Friends offered me a couch, but I refused. I wanted to stay in my home, yet the home felt unsafe. Weeks passed. The camera caught an image again. The man standing near the side door of my bungalow, 2:45 a.m. No mask this time, face fully visible under streetlight. I looked closer, his nose, a scar on his right cheek, his eyes cold. I froze when I recognized him. It was a close friend of Emma's brother. I remembered seeing a photo of him at a gathering. My stomach dropped. I took the still image, messaged Emma in a panic. "I think I know who it is." She gasped, said she'd check with her brother discreetly. The next day, Emma showed up at my office. She said the brother denied being near Woodland Drive, claimed he had alibi. But she found out he'd moved out of state a month ago. His old contacts cut off. It didn't add up. We agreed. I would stay away from the bungalow for a few nights while I considered what to do. The police supported a restraining order. They promised to keep increasing patrols. I felt slightly safe again. Then one night I woke to the scent of smoke. I sat up, heart racing. The living room lamp cast orange light on the wall. I climbed out of bed, Luna trailing. In the kitchen doorway, the stove burner was red hot. I turned it off and gagged. The smell of burning plastic filled the room. Whoever had accessed the bungalow turned the stove on to high heat and left. It could have been a deadly fire. I called the fire department. The investigators said it was arson attempt. They dusted for prints near the knob. I trembled. That was it. I made the decision to leave. I packed what I could carry, changed locks once again, notified my landlord. I found a new, smaller apartment in a safer complex downtown with 24/7 security and fewer vulnerabilities. I moved in under the cover of friends helping. The bungalow stood behind me, silent. I changed my phone number, email address, stopped posting location updates online. I took a leave from work, spent days with Emma and her family to ground myself. I attempted therapy for the creeping fear and anxiety. Months passed. I didn't hear from him. I watched footage occasionally. No new entries, no forms of intrusion. The police closed the case due to lack of direct evidence linking him to the scenes. I asked the landlord if anything happened at the bungalow after I left. He said occasional reports of prowlers, but nothing specific. I sold the car I'd used then. The license plate had been photographed multiple times. Today, nearly a year later, I still pause at street corners, glance over my shoulder when passing a window. I still wake sometimes around 2 a.m., remembering the knock, the man's eyes. The house I called home feels like a memory boxed in glass, fragile. I keep Luna close. I'm more protective, more guarded. I remind myself, survival is not weakness. I survived being seen. I survived being followed. He never proclaimed what he wanted. He never asked me anything. He just watched. If there's one thing I know, stalkers don't want what you think they want. They want to break your sense of safety, turn your own space into a hall of mirrors. The man in the heavy coat achieved that. He made my home unfamiliar. When someone is watching, every creak becomes a shout, every shadow a shape. I learned that the hard way. Story the end. The autumn air in Portland carried a chill that hinted at rain. It was early October, and the days were shorter, darker, colder. Emily Ray had just moved into her new apartment on Hawthorne Boulevard, a small one-bedroom with creaky floors and a narrow balcony that overlooked the street. She liked it because it was hers. Cheap, a little shabby, but independent. She just turned 28 and left behind a messy breakup in Seattle. This new start was supposed to be quiet. Safe. She worked as a barista at a small cafe called Redfern Coffee 2 blocks away. It was the kind of place with hanging plants, local art, and regulars who always ordered the same thing. Emily quickly fell into a routine. Morning shifts, grocery runs, a walk around the block before bed. The familiarity felt good. For a while, everything was simple, until the note appeared. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-October. She left her apartment at 6:45 a.m., coffee thermos in hand, and saw a small folded paper wedged under her windshield wiper. She thought it was another parking ticket, but when she unfolded it, there was no citation, just a single sentence, written in messy block letters. "You looked beautiful in that red sweater yesterday." She froze, staring at the note. Her stomach sank. Yesterday, she'd worn that sweater to take out her trash. She hadn't even gone anywhere else. Maybe it was someone from her building, she thought. A neighbor trying to flirt in an awkward way. She looked around, half expecting to see someone watching, but the street was quiet. She crumpled the note and tossed it in her car's cup holder. At work, she couldn't shake it. Every time the cafe door opened, she caught herself glancing up, scanning faces. A couple of customers made lingering eye contact, but none of them seemed suspicious. Still, she felt something cold pressing at the back of her mind. That night, she checked her locks twice before going to bed. 2 days later, there was another note. This one wasn't under her windshield. It was slid under her apartment door. "You shouldn't walk home alone. Someone might hurt you." Emily stared at it for a long time. Her chest tightened, and she could feel her heart thudding hard enough to hear it. There were no smudges, no fingerprints, no clue who'd written it. She checked the hallway, but it was empty. She considered calling the police, but what would she even say? Someone left a creepy note. They'd probably tell her there wasn't much they could do. She called her friend and coworker, Jenna, instead. "You're sure it's not just some idiot in your building?" Jenna asked. "Mm, maybe some guy trying to get your attention?" "It doesn't feel like that," Emily said. "It feels like they know me, like they're watching." Jenna paused. "Okay, that's weird. You should tell your landlord at least." "I will," Emily said, though she didn't. Over the next week, small things started happening. Her doormat was moved one morning, shifted a few inches to the left. The trash can by her car was knocked over twice. And one night, when she came home late from a closing shift, she noticed her doorknob was cold to the touch, like someone had just been there. Then the phone calls started. The first one came at 11:37 p.m. on a Sunday. Emily was already in bed when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, just faint static. "Who is this?" Still nothing. Then, right before the line went dead, she heard a quiet inhale. She sat up, staring into the dark. It happened again the next night, and again the one after that. Always late. Always from an unknown number. Sometimes she heard breathing, once a faint whisper she couldn't make out. After the fourth call, she blocked the number, but new ones came from different numbers. She went to the police that week. The officer at the desk listened patiently, took down her statement, and told her they'd file a report. He asked if she had any idea who might be behind it. "No," she said. "I just moved here. I don't really know anyone." He nodded, handed her a card, and told her to call if anything escalated. By the end of October, Emily's nerves were unraveling. She barely slept, jumped at every sound, and avoided leaving her apartment after dark. She started keeping her phone on video record when she went outside, just in case. Then came the package. It was a small brown box with no return address, left at her door on Halloween morning. Inside was a Polaroid picture, grainy, slightly blurred, but she could tell what it was. A photo of her sleeping in bed. Her mouth went dry. She dropped the picture, her hands shaking. The angle, it was from inside her room, the corner near the window. She checked the locks, the window frame, everything. Nothing looked forced, but the realization hit her hard. Someone had been inside. She called the police again, this time frantic. 2 officers came, checked her apartment, and took the photo as evidence. They told her to stay with a friend if she could. She stayed at Jenna's for the next few nights. Jenna lived with her boyfriend, Chris, and they tried to make her feel safe. But Emily felt eyes on her everywhere. She barely spoke, barely ate. On the 4th night, her phone buzzed with another message from an unknown number. "Why'd you leave home? I liked watching you sleep." Her scream brought Jenna running. They went to the police again, and this time, an investigator took her statement more seriously. They suggested installing cameras in her apartment and around the building. Her landlord reluctantly agreed. For a while, nothing happened. Weeks passed. Emily started to believe maybe the stalker had gotten scared off by the cameras. She went back to her apartment, tried to live normally again. Then, one night in early December, she woke up to a faint tapping sound. It was coming from the living room window. She sat up, holding her breath. The sound came again, soft, rhythmic, like a fingernail tapping glass. Her heart raced. She reached for her phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept toward the sound. The tapping stopped. She waited, frozen, then slowly pulled back the curtain. There was nothing, just the dark street below. Then, as she exhaled, her eyes caught movement on the glass. A single fingerprint. Fresh. The next morning, she checked her security camera footage. The feed from the front hallway was fine, but the one covering her window was static. Just black screen. She rewound the footage from earlier that night and froze when she saw it. The screen flickered for a moment at 2:16 a.m., and a faint silhouette appeared for half a second, standing outside the glass. She called the police again, but when they came, the figure was too blurry to identify. They increased patrols in her neighborhood and told her to keep her doors locked at all times. Emily couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every shadow looked like a man's shape. Every noise made her heart pound. Then a week later, she got another package. This one wasn't at her door. It was in her car. She'd parked on the street overnight, and when she opened the driver's door the next morning, a small padded envelope sat on the seat. Inside was a flash drive. Her stomach twisted as she plugged it into her laptop. The folder contained 3 videos, each about a minute long. The first was footage of her walking from her apartment to the cafe, shot from across the street. The second was her inside her living room, brushing her hair in front of the mirror. The third was her sleeping again from the same corner as before. She yanked the drive out and threw it across the room, trembling. This time, the police took it seriously. A detective named Aaron Fields was assigned to her case. He was calm, professional, and kind. He set up surveillance outside her building and had the tech unit trace the texts and calls, though most of them came from unregistered burners. Still, she felt safer knowing someone was finally watching out for her. But safety was an illusion. One night, near Christmas, she was closing the cafe alone. It was nearly midnight, the street outside empty. She was wiping down tables when she noticed a figure standing across the street under the flickering streetlight. Tall, hooded, still. Her throat went dry. She turned off the lights, crouched behind the counter, and called 911. When officers arrived, the figure was gone. They searched the area but found nothing. That night, she stayed at a motel. In the morning, she got a text. "You shouldn't hide from me. I'll always find you." The phone slipped from her hand. The police put her under temporary protection for a few weeks, checking in regularly, but the messages kept coming, each more personal, more detailed. "You wore that gray hoodie again. I like your hair down. You look sad at work today. I hate when you're sad. You left your window open again. You trust too easily." By February, Emily was unraveling. She quit her job, barely left her apartment, and taped every window shut. Detective Fields tried to reassure her they were close to finding the stalker, but weeks went by without progress. Then one night, her building lost power. The lights went out around 10:30 p.m., plunging the hallway into darkness. Emily grabbed her phone and used the flashlight to check the breaker panel, but as she opened the closet, she heard it, footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Heavy. They stopped outside her door. Her breathing turned shallow. Then the doorknob rattled. She stumbled back, clutching her phone. "Who's there?" she yelled, her voice trembling. No answer. Just another slow rattle of the knob. Then silence. She called 911, whispering into the phone. The dispatcher told her to stay put and keep the door locked. A few minutes later, the footsteps retreated. When the police arrived, the hallway was empty, but near her door they found a small envelope taped to the wall. Inside was another Polaroid, this one of her sitting on her couch earlier that evening, watching TV. She hadn't noticed anyone there. The next morning, Detective Fields met her in person. He assured her they were narrowing down a suspect, someone seen loitering around her building several times. A man in his 40s, unkempt, wearing a dark jacket. No name yet. That weekend, the suspect was caught on surveillance again, walking past her window at 2 a.m. The police staked out the area, hoping to catch him. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third, the man returned. Officers followed and apprehended him near an alley a block away. His name was Dennis Carr, 43, no fixed address. When they searched him, they found a burner phone, a camera, and several Polaroid photos, all of Emily. When Detective Fields told her they'd caught him, Emily broke down, crying. Relief, fear, disbelief, it all came at once. The police assured her he'd be charged for stalking, trespassing, and harassment. She could finally sleep again. For the first time in months, she started to breathe easier. She went back to work part-time and started seeing friends again. But safety, she learned, can be a trick of the mind. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in her mailbox. No return address, just her name written in the same uneven handwriting as the first notes. He wasn't the only one. Her blood ran cold. She ran to the police, but the letter had no prints. Detective Fields told her it could be a sick prank, maybe someone copying the case after seeing it on the news. But the next day, another note came, this time taped to her bathroom mirror. "You shouldn't have trusted them. I never left." Her scream echoed through the building. Police swept the apartment. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, no evidence anyone had been there. But Emily knew. Someone still had a key. That night, she packed her bags and moved into Jenna's spare room again. She barely slept. Every creak made her flinch. Every car light outside the window made her heart race. Then, one night in March, while Jenna and Chris were asleep, Emily woke to a faint buzzing sound. It was her phone, another unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. At first, just silence, then a whisper. You look even prettier when you're scared. She screamed and dropped the phone. Jenna came running and they called the police again. The number was traced to a disposable SIM bought 2 days earlier in another city. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She moved again, this time across the state to Eugene. She changed her number, her email, everything. For a while, things were quiet. She found a new job, a new apartment, even started therapy. Months passed and the nightmares began to fade. Until one morning that summer when she stepped outside to get her mail and found a small white envelope taped to her car door. Inside was a single Polaroid. Her new apartment, taken from across the street. And on the back, in the same uneven handwriting. Miss me? Emily's legs gave out and she dropped to the ground, sobbing. The police opened another investigation, but there was little to go on. The handwriting matched the old notes, but no prints, no cameras caught anything. Over time, the messages stopped again. But Emily never stopped looking over her shoulder, never slept without a light on, never parked her car in the same spot twice. Sometimes when she walked home at night, she'd swear she heard footsteps behind her, slow, steady, matching hers. But every time she turned around, there was no one there. And yet, deep down, she knew. He was still out there, watching, waiting. Story the end. I remember the first night I felt watched. It was late October in a small suburb of Chicago, and I was spending a weekend at the house my sister Claire and her husband Tom had bought just a few months earlier. I'd come from New York for a visit. Work had been brutal, and I was eager for the quiet, jaw-dropping kind of calm only the Midwest in fall could bring. The trees flame-colored, the air cool but not sharp, and the house sat set back from the street, a modest two-story with dark green shutters and a broad front porch. I couldn't say exactly when the feeling began because I didn't acknowledge it at first. But I had a moment as I sat curled in the living room armchair, half reading a novel, the TV softly humming a rerun of something boring, when my eyes drifted to the window. I thought I saw a shadow at the edge of the lawn, just beyond the porch lights. A shape crouched by the fence, maybe. My heart skipped. I stared, trying to tell myself it was nothing, just a bird, a trash bag, the stump of a bush. I told myself the feeling was paranoia. New house, unfamiliar surroundings, me alone while Claire and Tom were out at a school event. And yet, when I walked through the house to check the back windows, the living room TV loud enough to mask sounds, I noticed the curtains in the bedroom upstairs were slightly parted. That wasn't unusual. They often left them a bit open before bed. But on the landing between the bedrooms, I paused and listened. There was a faint click from the window latch upstairs. I froze. My mind raced. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe the wind shifted the curtain. I counted the seconds before I convinced myself, no, you're fine. Just go upstairs and call it a night. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking, the house settling. The room was dark, but for the glow of the street light filtering through the partly open curtains. I pulled them closed, locked the window, and turned off the light. I laid in bed, pressed the pillow to my ear, listening for silences. I counted breaths. Finally, I drifted into a fitful sleep. When I woke, it was early morning. Gray dawn light filtered through the blinds. The room felt wrong. I couldn't shake it. I got up, walked to the window, pulled aside the curtains. In the dew-burdened grass, I saw footprints. Fresh footprints. 2 bare footprints, muddy and elongated. Someone had walked from the edge of the yard, up the side of the house, and stood just below that window. I gasped. Went back downstairs, looked out the front porch. There were footprints in the leaf-covered lawn that didn't align with the sidewalk or driveway. They skirted the outer hedge and went toward the backyard. By the time I told Claire, she was alarmed, but she reasoned it was probably a neighborhood kid messing around, maybe drinking, playing pranks. She assured me they'd call a local security company and ask them to install a motion sensor light by the side yard. I nodded, tried to calm my anxiety, told myself I was overreacting. 2 nights later, I woke again around 3 a.m. This time I heard whispering. Soft, unintelligible, maybe 10 feet outside the window. My heart hammered. I held my breath. The sound flicked off. I heard the floorboard of the porch creak, then the footsteps retracing. I didn't open my eyes for fear of what I might see. Morning. The footprints again, this time closer to the house. The window latch was open. The curtain had been pulled aside slightly. The screwed-in air vent beneath the window was now missing. I told Claire. She mobilized Tom. They installed a bunch of cameras, one at the front door, one at the back, one in the yard aimed at the side entry gate. They told the neighbors. The next few days, I kept my phone beside me, charger plugged in, flashlight by the bed. Then came the emails. My email at work, my personal Gmail, my sister's email. I'd commented on a photo she posted. All of them got strange messages from a new address I didn't recognize. The messages were short. One line, "I see you." Another, "You're safe." Then, "Thank you for showing up." The sender name was M. I didn't respond. The phrasing was wrong, the timing wrong. I forwarded one to the police. The police visited the house. They were professional, took the evidence, photos of the footprints, the missing vent screw, the time-stamped camera footage of nothing but a blurry silhouette at midnight. They said I should get a restraining order if someone shows up again, but without a clear suspect, the process would take weeks. They gave me a pamphlet about stalking. I glanced through it and felt my dread deepen. I tried to keep living. Back in New York, I told my friends about it, half joking, half terrified. They told me to get out of the house if it got worse, but I didn't have to wait long. One evening I walked the dog, the sister's dog, a golden retriever named Molly, down the street. It was dusk, fog creeping between the street lamps. I tossed the ball near the park. As Molly sprinted off, I saw the figure, someone leaning inside a parked SUV across the street. For a moment I thought it was Tom pulling out something, but the vehicle wasn't his. It was new, tinted windows. The person inside looked like they were rummaging. They turned and looked straight at me for a second. I froze. They reset their hood, closed the door, and drove away slowly. I rushed back inside, locked doors. I told Claire. She scrambled in. Tom called in a favor with his old contact at a local private investigation firm. They agreed to install more cameras, like a hidden dash cam in the driveway, a motion-activated audio recorder that captured anything going on outside the house after midnight. Then came the letters. 3 envelopes, left on the doorstep, no stamps. My initial thought was prank. I opened the first one, a Polaroid of my car parked in the driveway. The second, a small vial of something dark, smelling of petrol. The third, a folded piece of paper, "You're almost home." On the back of the note was my name, printed with my house number. I showed them to the PI and the police. They told me it was serious. One late night I woke to my phone buzzing. A text from M. "I heard you breathe." I sat up. The tilt of the light from the porch swept across the bedroom. I listened. Nothing. I texted back to Claire. She didn't respond. So I got up, walked to the front window. Through the blinds, I saw a figure crouched near the hedge. I yelled. The person bolted, sprinted across the lawn through the leaves, jumped the fence. I called 911. The sirens approached. I stood on the porch in my bathrobe, the phone clutched. The figure was gone. The next day, the PI showed me the footage from the hidden driveway camera. At 2:41 a.m., a van parked across the street at the curve in the road, lights off. 2 minutes later, a figure stepped out, walked to the hedge outside the house, turned on a flashlight briefly. Then the van drove away. The same van was recorded before, 2 nights ago at the identical time. The PI found no plates, license plate obscured, tinted. The owner of the house a few lots away had reported a van like that days before, loitering, lights off, then gone. From then on, I slept with a baseball bat under my bed. The dog stayed in my room. I checked locks myself. I changed my route to work when I visited New York. But the worst part was not the van, not the steps outside, not even the letters. It was the voice. I heard a voice at 1:23 a.m. one morning, soft outside the window. I'm almost inside. Clear. I laid flat on the bed, blanket over my head. I stared at the ceiling. I thought of headlines. Stalker killed resident. Home invasion, Chicago suburbs. The wind rustled. The dog whimpered. I held my breath. Hours passed. I didn't go downstairs. At dawn, I called the PI, who told me we might have a trespasser they hadn't caught. The police came, inspected the house. They found footprints at the side door, and the door seal bent. The lock was scratched. They dusted for prints, but found nothing usable. I hated that house. The cozy, suburban house now felt like a cage. Every creak was someone outside. Every wind gust a possible arrival. I stopped walking Molly alone. I refused to take the car out late. I stayed with Claire in the living room, lights on, TV loud. She began sleeping less, Tom more irritable. I visited less often. The home felt tainted. One night while there on business, I brought my laptop to work from the guest room. At 10:15 p.m., I took a break, walked to the porch to get fresh air. The moon was half hidden. The side yard light flickered. I heard a crunch behind me. I spun. Someone stood at the edge of the light. No hoodie, face bare, pale. I gaped. Their mouth moved. Hello. I froze. They took a step forward, then turned and ran. I screamed and ran inside, slammed the door. I told Tom and Claire immediately. They called 911, still no arrest. I couldn't sleep. For the first time in my 28 years, I thought, I might die here. Then we got a break. 2 nights later, the PI captured the van again at 2 a.m. This time it parked. A person exited with what looked like a long case, maybe a duffel bag or a rifle case, but unclear through fog and night vision. The person walked across the street, approached the fence at the side yard, and after a moment entered the yard, reached up toward the window. The motion sensor light turned on. The person jumped back, ran, got in the van, and left. The timestamp log, 2:03 a.m. Armed with this, the police issued search warrants for the vehicles in the area. The van's owner was registered to a local security company employee. We found that the security company guy had been fired weeks before, something about allegations of stealing equipment, but no concrete link to the house. The trail went cold. Meanwhile, the guy began calling, someone with a disguised voice, breathing masked. I received voicemail. Heavy breathing, then rasping voice. You can't hide forever. I listened on speaker, phone trembling in my hand. I deleted the message files and backed up copies on a flash drive, sent them to the PI. I left the house early the next morning and checked into a hotel in the city. I couldn't stay there anymore. My sister understood. She rented a nearby apartment for me temporarily, but I hated leaving. The house, once a place of rest, now felt ominous. I kept picturing that pale face, that van. I kept hearing the voice. I'm almost inside. Weeks passed. Then one Sunday morning I got an email from a new address. Tonight, without them. Then a location map, just a link. I clicked it out of curiosity and my stomach dropped. It led to a wooded lot behind the house, an overgrown tract with abandoned concrete slabs, old pipes. I messaged Tom, told him. He and the PI went to stake it out that night. They found nothing. Another voicemail. You made me wait. I showed the audio to the police. They called it harassment, but without direct threat of violence. They said the standard was lower, trespass, stalking, etc. I felt powerless. Then the breaking point came the week before Thanksgiving. I arrived at the house late after leaving the city for my visit. The porch light was out. I turned on the porch floodlight from the security panel outside. The house was dark inside. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I froze. I flicked my phone flashlight. Step by step, I entered the hallway. My coat on the rack had been pushed aside. I heard a faint squeak. Someone upstairs. I pressed against the wall, creeping silently. The house smelled faintly of petrol. I called Tom's number. No answer. I crept up the stairs, hand trembling. At the landing, I peeked. The bedroom door was open. The curtains were drawn back. The window cracked open. Outside, I saw boot prints in the frost on the sill. Within the room, on the bed, lay the Polaroid camera that had taken my picture months ago. The film strip ejected. I picked it up, hands shaking. I flipped it over. A picture, dark, blurred, but I could make out my shadow lying in bed. I suddenly realized I was being watched inside. The window latch was broken. Someone had undone it from outside. I backed away, almost slipping on the carpet. I dashed downstairs, grabbed the bat from under the bed, locked myself in the bathroom. I called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay inside. Keep quiet, lights off. I heard the sirens. Once again they came, but slower than I expected. The intruder had already fled. Police found footprints outside the window, tire tracks in the driveway gravel, and the case of the duffel bag still on site, but no suspect. Later, I learned from the PI that the tracks led to a local rental truck place, but before warrants could be executed, the vehicle had been returned, cleaned, owner gone. Claire and Tom sold the house a month later. They moved away. They insisted it was for unrelated reasons, job transfers, etc., but I knew it was the fear. We still keep the footage, the letters, the voicemails. I stay in a different city now, change my number yearly, use two-factor security, keep curtains drawn. And I sometimes wake at 3 a.m. hearing the floorboard creak in my rented apartment, wondering if someone just walked inside. I never saw the face again, never got an arrest. The emails wait in my old inbox, unused now, but not deleted, frozen in time. Some nights I think I'll go back to that street, that green shuttered house, just to prove I'm not scared. But I know I can't. Because fear isn't just about being watched. Fear is about knowing someone watched you, changed you, and you'll never feel safe the same way again. Story the end. The first time I noticed something off, it was subtle, like a shadow flickering out of the corner of my eye. I lived in a small apartment complex in Portland, Oregon, a nondescript building tucked between a laundromat and a diner. Life was quiet, predictable. I had a routine. Wake up around 7 a.m., make coffee, check emails, then leave for work at a local graphic design studio. Nothing thrilling, but it was comfortable. At least it had been comfortable. It started with small things. At first, I noticed my mail slightly shifted in ways that made me pause. Bills that I had set neatly were slightly askew. Junk mail opened that I hadn't touched. At first, I told myself it was my own forgetfulness or the cleaning crew rearranging things. But then there were the noises. The apartment above me had been empty for weeks. I knew this because I had lived there long enough to recognize the sound of neighbors coming and going. But late at night, I started hearing movement above my ceiling. Soft shuffling, then the occasional creak as if someone was pacing. I live on the second floor, so it wasn't unusual for neighbors to make noise, but I had a key detail wrong. There was no one there. One night, after an unusually restless evening, I heard a knock at my door around 2 a.m. It was a soft tap, 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 deliberate, slow. My heart raced. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole. Nobody. Just the dimly lit hallway and the faint hum of the street outside. I shrugged it off as a hallucination, maybe a dream, seeping into reality. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. Then came the notes. The first one I found on my windshield while leaving for work. Written in sloppy red ink, it said, "You looked at me yesterday. I saw you." I froze, gripping the steering wheel. I hadn't looked at anyone, or at least I didn't remember. Panic bubbled under my skin as I tore the note into pieces and tossed them into the trash. Days later, more notes appeared, on my door, slipped under it, taped to my mirror. Always written in the same erratic hand, always vaguely accusatory, sometimes just single words. Alone. Don't forget me. Watching. My friends started noticing my anxiety. I told them a weird neighbor was leaving notes, trying to laugh it off. Deep down, I knew it was more than a neighbor. It escalated. My apartment began showing signs of intrusion. Small things. Things moved slightly. The lock on my door had scratches I didn't make. I installed cameras inside my apartment, but the first night they captured nothing, just the normal hum of city life. Yet the feeling of being watched grew heavier, suffocating. One evening I came home to find my door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. Inside there was a single object on my kitchen counter, a Polaroid photo of me sleeping on my couch. I didn't own a Polaroid camera. My stomach dropped. My safe little life had been infiltrated. I called the police. They took a report, said it sounded like harassment, but with no suspect, they couldn't do much. After that, I couldn't sleep. I tried staying at friends' places, but the stalker adapted. Notes were left at my work, my car was keyed, someone had broken into my mailbox. One morning, I found a tiny webcam embedded in my bathroom vent. The police confiscated it, but no fingerprints, no leads. Every day felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The stalker seemed to know my schedule, where I went, when I left work, which grocery store I visited. I became paranoid in public. Every passerby felt like a threat. Every stranger's glance, a confirmation that I was being followed. The most horrifying part was the silence between the attacks, the calm before the storm. Every quiet moment at my apartment was a minefield of fear. I started changing routines. I varied my routes to work, stopped using my car, switched phones, changed my email and social media handles. Nothing helped. He or she always found a way. Once I came home to find my apartment completely rearranged. Furniture moved, dishes out of place, personal items scattered. On my bedroom wall was another note. I'm inside. I've always been inside. The terror reached a new level when I heard someone whisper my name at night. I live alone. I live on the second floor. The voice was clear, deliberate, chillingly intimate. I called the police immediately. They came, Searched, found nothing. I started carrying a knife everywhere. I slept with lights on, doors locked, windows secured, but the dread never left. Then came the phone calls. I would wake up to my phone ringing, numbers blocked, and when I answered, only heavy breathing, the occasional whisper, "I see you." Sometimes they hung up, sometimes they just breathed. The calls were relentless, a psychological assault. I stopped answering my phone, but the calls persisted. Eventually, I installed motion sensors and additional cameras inside and outside my apartment. Footage revealed terrifying glimpses: a shadowy figure outside my window late at night, pacing, sometimes just standing, watching. Sometimes I could see a glint of a flashlight. But every time I called the police, they would arrive and find no one. It was as if the stalker had a sixth sense, always disappearing just before detection. One afternoon, I received a package at work with no return address. Inside was a small handcrafted doll that looked eerily like me. Its eyes were painted with exacting detail. Its clothes were similar to mine, even down to the red scarf I always wore. Beneath the doll was a note: "You can't hide. Not even here." My coworkers noticed my panic. They suggested therapy, a restraining order, but the fear I felt was beyond the scope of legal measures. It wasn't just about safety anymore, it was about sanity. I became hyper-aware, constantly checking corners, closets, even ceiling vents. I installed a panic button in my bedroom, one in my living room. I told friends to check on me daily. Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake, imagining the stalker in every shadow, every reflection, every sound. Then, one night, everything changed. I was in my apartment, sitting on the couch, trying to calm down with a book. The power went out suddenly. Total darkness. My phone was dead. The only light was the faint glow of the city outside. I heard it immediately, the soft creak of my bedroom door opening. My heart thumped violently. I grabbed the knife from the counter. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. No response. Just the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching. I backed against the wall, knife raised. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then I felt a breath against my ear. Not a whisper, just a presence. I swung the knife blindly. Nothing. The next morning, I woke up on my couch, disoriented. My apartment was in disarray again. The kitchen window was cracked, tiny footprints dusted in dirt across the living room floor. My door lock was broken. The note this time was different, closer than ever, always. I knew I couldn't stay. The police had no leads. Friends offered to let me stay with them, but I knew it wouldn't last. He or she was patient, meticulous. I moved out of Portland entirely, across several states, changing my name, job, everything. I tried to disappear. It helped for a while. I found a small town in Wisconsin, rented a secluded house at the edge of a forest. Life started to feel normal again, cautiously normal. I thought I had escaped. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, I opened the mailbox and found a small, plain envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Me, standing on my porch, taken from the edge of the woods. There was no note this time, just the photo. I called the police. Again, they took the evidence, promised to investigate. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some people aren't stopped by distance, by new identities, by law enforcement. Some people are patient, obsessive, and terrifyingly skilled at erasing themselves from detection. Every time I hear a rustle in the trees or a car that's parked a little too long near my house, my heart skips a beat. Every time my phone rings and the number is blocked, I flinch. Some nights I wake in the middle of the night, certain someone is standing in my doorway, watching, waiting. The worst part is not knowing when, not knowing how, not knowing if it's just around the corner or miles away. Because I know with a certainty that chills my blood that no matter where I go, no matter how far, no matter what precautions I take, he is still out there, watching, waiting. I can't go back to Portland. I can't stay in one place for long. Friends drift away, unable to deal with the fear that I live with every second. I've become a ghost in my own life, a shadow of the person I used to be. And even now, typing this, I feel the weight of eyes on me, from outside, from the dark. The stalker doesn't just steal safety, they steal peace, sanity, the very ability to feel at home in your own life. And the terrifying part, they don't always get caught. Sometimes they vanish as suddenly as they appeared, and sometimes you move thinking you've escaped, only to find the proof that they followed silently, patiently, like a predator never satisfied, never finished. I live like this now, constantly on edge, unable to relax, every shadow a potential threat. I leave lights on at night. I lock doors, set alarms, check locks repeatedly. I sleep with the knife under my pillow, my phone by my side, ready, and I know that no matter what I do, it may not be enough, because he's already inside my life. He's always inside my life. I don't know when he will strike again or what he wants or why, but I know this. You don't need to be famous, beautiful, or careless to be a target. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones who thought they were safe, who find themselves living in the shadow of someone who watches, waits, and knows too much. And somewhere out there, he waits. Always. Watching. Patiently. Story the end. It started the summer I moved into my first apartment alone. I just turned 27, and after years of roommates and chaotic leases, I was finally renting my own place, a small one-bedroom unit in a quiet part of Portland, Oregon. The complex wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. My apartment was on the second floor, facing a parking lot lined with sycamore trees. I liked how the light filtered through their leaves in the morning, how I could hear kids playing in the distance, and the occasional dog bark echoing off the concrete walls. I worked as a veterinary technician at a clinic about 20 minutes away. My days were long but routine: feeding, cleaning, assisting with surgeries, paperwork. I usually came home exhausted, microwaved something, watched TV, and went to bed early. I didn't know many people in the area, so my evenings were quiet, predictable, and peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control of my life. The first odd thing happened in late August. I came home from work one evening and found a small white envelope taped to my apartment door. My name, Sarah, was written in neat block letters on the front. No return address. I stood there a moment, uneasy but curious, and opened it right there in the hallway. Inside was a Polaroid photo, my car parked exactly where it was right now, taken sometime earlier that day. Scrawled on the bottom edge of the photo were the words, "You always park in the same spot." I remember standing there, frozen, my brain trying to rationalize it. Maybe a neighbor playing a joke, maybe some kind of weird flyer prank. But the tone of the message wasn't funny. It felt deliberate. I looked around the empty hallway, then down the stairwell, half expecting someone to be watching. Nobody. That night, I triple-checked that my doors and windows were locked. I told myself it was probably a mistake. Maybe the envelope meant for someone else. But when I woke up the next morning, there was another envelope slid under my door. Another Polaroid, this time a photo of me, taken from behind as I was walking up the stairs the night before. The caption said, "You should smile more." My heart sank. I called the property manager, told her someone was harassing me. She sounded polite, but uninterested. "We haven't had any reports of suspicious activity," she said. "Maybe it's someone who knows you?" I didn't know anyone in the building. I went to the police next. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic but blunt. "Without a clear threat or suspect, there's not much we can do. Could be a prank." He suggested I install a camera near my door. I bought a small motion-activated camera the same day and mounted it above my doorframe. For a few days, nothing happened. I tried to convince myself that it was over. But then, a week later, I got home to find my welcome mat flipped upside down. It seemed small, but I knew I hadn't left it that way. I checked the footage on my camera. Nothing. It hadn't recorded a thing. When I checked the settings, I realized the camera had been unplugged from its power source. That's when I started feeling truly afraid. Someone had gotten close enough to my door to disable the camera. The next few nights, I barely slept. Every creak in the walls, every distant footstep in the hallway made my heart race. I started keeping my lights off at night so it wouldn't be obvious when I was home. Then one night in early September, I woke around 2:30 a.m. to a faint tapping sound. It was soft but steady. Tap, tap, tap. I thought maybe it was from the pipes or the wind. Then I realized it was coming from my living room window. I froze in bed, listening. The tapping stopped. Then came the sound of something brushing against the glass. My body went cold. I slowly got up, tiptoed toward the window, and peeked through the blinds. There was someone standing outside. I could barely make out the shape in the dim light, but it was a man, tall, hood pulled over his head. He was standing on the narrow strip of grass between my building and the fence, looking directly at my window. I gasped and stumbled backward. The movement must have caught his attention. because he tilted his head as if trying to see through the blinds. I grabbed my phone and called 911. My voice was shaking so badly I could hardly get the words out. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line until officers arrived. But by the time the police came 10 minutes later, the man was gone. They searched the area and found nothing. After that, I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Emily across town for a week. She insisted I file a report, which I did, but again, there wasn't much the police could do without more evidence. When I finally went back to my apartment, I noticed small things out of place. My kitchen light was on, though I was sure I'd turned it off. My bathroom door was half open instead of closed. Nothing looked stolen or broken, but the air felt wrong, violated somehow. I changed the locks and installed 2 new cameras, one inside the living room, one facing the window. I even bought a small alarm that beeped if the door opened. For a while, that helped me feel safer. Then came the messages. They started as text messages from an unknown number. The first one said, "You shouldn't have left." The next, "You looked pretty at the grocery store today." I felt sick when I read that because I had gone grocery shopping earlier that afternoon. I texted back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly, "You know me." I blocked the number, but new ones kept popping up. Sometimes they'd send photos, grainy, zoomed-in pictures of me driving or walking to my car. Once there was a picture of my bedroom window taken from the grass below. I showed everything to the police. They said the numbers were likely burner phones, hard to trace. They recommended I change my number and keep my blinds closed. I did both. But the messages kept coming. By October, I was living in constant fear. I started skipping work, too anxious to leave the house. My boss was understanding at first, but after the 3rd week, she gently suggested I take unpaid leave. I agreed. Emily checked on me often, but even she started to seem worried about how paranoid I'd become. I was jumping at every noise, every flicker of light outside. Then, one night, I heard something that nearly broke me. It was a Friday. Rain was hitting the windows hard. I was sitting on the couch trying to distract myself with a movie when I heard a faint creaking from the hallway outside my apartment. My stomach tightened. I muted the TV. The creaking stopped. Then, after a few seconds, came a soft knock on my door. I didn't move. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera app, and pointed it toward the peephole. The hallway looked empty. Then I saw something move in the corner of the frame. A person stepping out of the blind spot beside the door. A man wearing a black hoodie and jeans. He had a mask on, one of those plain white plastic ones you might see at a costume store. He leaned close to my door, pressing his ear against it. I could hear his breathing through the wood. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out. I dialed 911 again, whispering to the dispatcher. She told me to stay inside, stay quiet. Officers were on the way. The man stayed there for what felt like an eternity, just listening. Then he slowly ran his fingers along the edge of the doorframe, almost tenderly, before turning and walking away. When the police arrived again, he was gone. This time they actually found something. Fresh shoe prints in the damp concrete outside leading toward the parking lot fence. But they ended there. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. I packed another bag and went back to Emily's. I told her I couldn't go back again. She tried to convince me to move in with her permanently, but I couldn't afford to break my lease. For the next month, I bounced between hotels and Emily's apartment. I changed my phone again, deactivated social media, even dyed my hair darker. The police promised they were monitoring the situation, but that didn't mean much. I was beginning to think maybe he'd lost interest when, in mid-November, I got an email. The subject line read, "You can't hide from me, Sarah." I hadn't used that email address anywhere new. It wasn't public. The message itself contained a single attachment, a photo, my new hair color, my new jacket, taken from behind while I was walking into the lobby of the hotel I'd been staying at for the past week. I screamed. That night, I checked out of the hotel and drove 6 hours to my parents' house in rural Idaho. They hadn't known the full story until then. I'd kept most of it from them to avoid worrying them. My mom cried when she saw the photos. My dad was furious, promising to handle it if the police wouldn't. But he was 70, retired, and had no way of finding someone who could vanish like a ghost. For a while, things were quiet there. No emails, no messages. I started to feel like maybe distance had done the trick. I got a temporary job at a local animal shelter, tried to build some sense of normalcy again. Then, one night in early December, I came home from work and found another Polaroid sitting on the front porch. No envelope this time, just a picture weighed down with a small rock. It was a photo of my parents' house taken from the road. The caption read, "Home for the holidays." I don't remember screaming, but my dad came running outside. When he saw the photo, his face turned red with rage. He called the sheriff right away. They dusted the photo for prints, nothing. They patrolled the area for days, but no one was caught. After that, my parents insisted I stay inside whenever possible. My dad installed motion lights and cameras around the property. Still, I barely slept. One night, just before Christmas, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. I thought I was dreaming at first, but then I heard the crunch of gravel, slow and deliberate. I sat up and peered through the blinds. There he was. The same man, same black hoodie, standing at the edge of the yard. Even from that distance, I could feel his eyes on me. I screamed for my dad, and the man bolted into the woods behind the house. My dad fired up the truck and tore down the dirt road trying to catch him, but by the time he reached the main road, there was no one there. The sheriff came again, said they'd increase patrols. I told them it was the same man, the same one from Oregon. They nodded sympathetically, but didn't have much to say. For the next few weeks, nothing happened. I began to relax again, a little. I even started thinking about moving somewhere new in the spring, maybe Montana or Colorado, somewhere he couldn't find me. Then, one morning in late January, I woke to an email from an unknown address. The subject line said simply, "Look outside." I almost didn't, but curiosity or fear made me. There, hanging from the tree branch outside my window, was a Polaroid clipped with a clothespin. I went outside slowly, my hands shaking, and took it down. The photo was of me, sleeping in my bed. The caption said, "You look peaceful." I dropped it and ran back inside, locking every door, dialing 911. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, they combed the property again. This time they found footprints near my window, leading back toward the woods. They said they'd never seen prints that close before. Whoever it was had been watching from within a few feet of where I slept. That night, my dad stayed awake with his rifle across his lap, but the man never came back. At least, not there. A week later, I packed everything and moved again. New phone, new name on the lease, new job. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Emily. I settled in a small town outside Boise, hoping anonymity would protect me. For the first few weeks, it seemed to work. No messages, no photos, no signs. Then, one night in March, I came home from work to find a single item taped to my front door, a Polaroid. It was of my old apartment in Portland, my car parked out front, taken from the same angle as the very first photo. The caption said, "Back where it started." I felt the world tilt. I called the detective who'd handled my original report. He told me they'd arrested someone, a man named Douglas Reeves, on unrelated charges. They'd found dozens of photos of me in his storage unit, along with notes about my routines, addresses, passwords, even photos of my parents' house. He'd apparently been following me for months before that first Polaroid. They found multiple burner phones, disguises, wigs, and a white mask. He was awaiting trial in Portland. The detective said, "You're safe now, Sarah. He can't hurt you anymore." But even now, a year later, I'm not sure I believe that. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and think I hear tapping on the window again. Sometimes I'll find my porch light turned off, though I know I left it on. I tell myself it's all in my head, leftover fear that won't fade. But last week, when I came home from work, there was an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was a picture of the courthouse in Portland, Douglas Reeves being led away in handcuffs. On the back, written in the same neat block letters, were 4 words, "You put me here." No return address, no fingerprints, just that photo. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep the blinds closed, every door double locked, every camera checked twice a day. Sometimes late at night, I swear I see a shadow on the sidewalk across the street, tall, still, watching. I tell myself it's just trauma, that he's gone. But then the tapping starts again. Soft, steady, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. And I know he's back. Story the end. The first time I saw him, I didn't think anything of it. It was early autumn, and the air in Minneapolis had that sharp chill that hinted at the coming cold. I was on my way home from my shift at the bookstore, earbuds in, coffee in hand, when I noticed a man across the street, standing too still. He was tall, wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood pulled up despite the mild weather. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me. I kept walking, trying not to look nervous. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just another random city stranger. When I reached my apartment building, I glanced back once more. He was still there, watching. That was the first night I felt the quiet unease that would eventually consume my life. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it was nothing, but then he started appearing more often. Sometimes I'd see him across the street when I left for work in the morning. Other times, I'd catch him lingering by the park across from my building. He never approached. He never spoke, just watched. My roommate, Sarah, thought I was overreacting. "You live in a city," she said, laughing it off. "There are weird people everywhere. Don't let it get to you." She was right, of course. There were always odd people, especially downtown. But this man wasn't just odd. He was consistent, methodical. Every few days I'd see him again, always standing at a distance, always in that same hoodie. Then, one night I got home late after closing up the store. It was close to midnight, and the street was nearly empty. I was unlocking the main door to my building when I heard a low whistle behind me. My stomach dropped. I turned, and there he was, standing at the corner under the streetlight. The light caught his face for the first time. Pale, clean-shaven, maybe mid-30s. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and then turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building made me flinch. I double-checked every lock, every window. Sarah came home around 2 a.m. from her bartending job, and when I told her what had happened, she rolled her eyes but agreed to help me check the building. We didn't find anything unusual. But the next morning, when I left for work, there was a single white daisy taped to my car door handle. No note, no explanation, just that flower. I threw it away and drove to work shaking. I told my boss, Kevin, about it, and he suggested I call the police. But what would I even say? There's a guy who looks at me sometimes. They'd laugh me off. So I didn't call. Over the next week, small things started happening. I'd hear faint knocks on the apartment door at odd hours, usually around midnight or 3 in the morning. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. Sometimes I'd find my welcome mat turned upside down. Once, I found a cigarette butt on the floor outside my door, still warm. Sarah started to believe me then. She saw him one evening while she was walking home, a man matching my description, standing under a tree near our building. She told me he didn't even look away when she stared at him, just stood there as if daring her to confront him. We called the police that night. 2 officers came, took down a report, and promised to increase patrols around the neighborhood. But there wasn't much else they could do. "Unless he threatens you or breaks in," one of them said, "there's no crime here." I tried to go about my life, tried to convince myself it would stop, but it didn't. It escalated. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of tapping on my window. I froze. We were on the 3rd floor. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. It was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the faint outline of a hand pressed against the glass. I screamed, and the hand disappeared. Sarah ran into my room, and when we turned on the lights, there was no one there. But on the window, there was a smear, like someone's fingers had dragged down the glass. The police came again, checked the fire escape, but found nothing. They said maybe it was a prank. I couldn't sleep after that. I started staying at work later, sometimes even sleeping on the break room couch. But even then, I felt him nearby. Once, I saw a man in a hoodie standing outside the store, staring through the window as I counted the register. He didn't come in. He just stood there until I locked the door and pulled down the metal grate. Then the phone calls began. The first few were silent. I'd pick up, say hello, and hear nothing but breathing. I blocked the number, but new ones would appear. One night, I answered out of sheer frustration and shouted, "What do you want from me?" The voice on the other end was low, calm. "You," he said. Then he hung up. I dropped the phone and cried until Sarah got home. We went to the police again. This time, they took it more seriously. They suggested I get a restraining order, though they admitted it would be hard without knowing his name or address. They told me to document everything, every call, every note, every sighting. So I did. I bought a notebook and started keeping track. The dates, times, what happened, how long he was around. I even took photos when I could. One of them, blurry but real, showed him standing across the street from my building looking straight into the camera. I emailed it to the police. They said they'd add it to the file. Weeks went by. I stopped seeing him as often, and I thought maybe it was over. I started sleeping again, cautiously optimistic. Then one morning, I woke to find my front door slightly open. Sarah was gone. She had left early for work, and I knew I had locked it the night before. Nothing was missing, but on the kitchen table was a small photo of me sleeping. That was the breaking point. I moved out that weekend. I found a new place on the other side of the city, a small one-bedroom apartment in a secure building with cameras and keycard access. I didn't tell anyone where I was moving except Sarah, the police, and my boss. I even changed my phone number and social media accounts. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The first few weeks were peaceful. No calls, no flowers, no signs of him. I started to believe I'd escaped. Then, one afternoon, I got a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a small silver keychain in the shape of a daisy. My heart dropped. I checked the security footage from the building lobby. The camera showed a delivery driver leaving packages, but mine wasn't among them. Whoever left it had done so after hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on and the curtains closed. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You look better in this apartment." I threw up in the sink. I called the police again, gave them the text, but they said it was impossible to trace unless he contacted me again. I bought pepper spray, installed extra locks, and even put a motion sensor in the hallway. I started seeing a therapist to cope with the anxiety, but she told me gently that my fear might be feeding him, that some stalkers thrive on the reaction. I didn't know how to stop reacting. How could I when he kept finding me? 2 months later, things got worse. One evening, I came home and found a note taped to my mirror. "Missed you last night." I didn't even go near the mirror. I ran straight out and called the police from the hallway. They arrived minutes later and swept the apartment. The back window had been forced open. This time, they dusted for prints and promised to post a patrol car outside for a few nights. But he was always one step ahead. I started noticing him again in public, at the grocery store, the coffee shop near my work, the gym. Always at a distance, pretending to browse or read, but I could feel him watching. Once, when I turned suddenly, our eyes met. He smiled again, that same calm, deliberate smile. I tried to confront him once. I marched up to him in the grocery store, trembling with anger and fear. "Why are you following me?" I demanded. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then he whispered, "Because you're mine," and walked away. The store security helped me file another report, but the police still couldn't find him. His face never showed up clearly on any camera footage, and the phone numbers always led nowhere. By winter, I was barely functioning. I quit my job, stopped seeing friends, and rarely left the apartment. I boarded up the windows, kept the lights on 24/7. I even moved my bed into the living room, away from the windows. Then one night I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. I froze, too scared to move. I could hear soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. Slow, careful, deliberate. I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, a voice whispered from the dark, "Shh! You'll wake the neighbors." I screamed. The lights flicked on, and I saw him standing there, hood down, face pale and calm, eyes fixed on me. He was holding a small knife, nothing fancy, just a kitchen knife. "I just wanted to see you up close," he said softly. "You shouldn't have moved." I lunged for the door, but he caught me by the arm. His grip was ice cold, stronger than I expected. I kicked, screamed, scratched. Somehow, I managed to slam my knee into his stomach and break free. I ran into the hall and pounded on my neighbor's door until he opened it, half asleep and confused. The man fled before the police arrived. They found the back door propped open with a brick, but no sign of him. That night, I packed what little I could carry and went to stay with my parents in Wisconsin. The police promised to increase security, to trace his phone, to do everything they could. For a while, it seemed like the nightmare was over. I got a new number, changed my name on social media again, even dyed my hair a different color. My parents' house was far from the city, quiet and safe. But a month later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name on the front. Inside was a photo of me sitting on my parents' porch, drinking coffee. On the back, in neat handwriting, it said, "You can't hide forever. I didn't tell my parents. I couldn't. They'd never sleep again." I burned the photo and started looking into witness protection programs, even though I knew that was extreme. It's been 2 years now. I live in Oregon under a new last name, in a quiet neighborhood where nobody knows me. I work remotely, keep to myself, avoid social media altogether. I have locks, alarms, cameras, everything. But sometimes late at night, I still feel it, that weight, that awareness that someone's watching. A few weeks ago, I found a daisy lying on my porch. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. No note, no sign of anyone nearby, just that flower. And now every night before I sleep, I leave the lights on and keep my phone close, because I know he's still out there, somewhere, waiting, watching, patient. Story the end. Madeline Parker had always liked living alone. Her apartment, a small third-floor walk-up in Portland, Oregon, overlooked a narrow street that smelled faintly of wet asphalt and coffee. She liked the quiet, the hum of distant traffic, and the way the sun slanted through her east-facing windows in the morning. At 28, she had built a life of routine. Work as a freelance graphic designer, occasional trips to local coffee shops, evenings spent reading or sketching. She was careful, private, and liked it that way. It started subtly in late October. On a Tuesday evening, she came home from her favorite cafe and noticed the doormat slightly askew. She paused, adjusting it, and brushed off the feeling of unease that ran down her spine. Her first thought was that a neighbor had moved it while entering their own apartment. That was plausible, logical. She told herself not to worry. The following week, she found a Polaroid slipped under her door. The image was of her walking up the street earlier that afternoon, carrying her laptop bag, hood pulled low over her face. There was no note, no signature, just the picture. Her heart pounded as she held it in her hand. Someone had been watching her. She filed it away in her kitchen drawer, attempting to push the thought out of her mind, but a sense of vulnerability lingered. Her routine became cautious. She took different routes from the coffee shop to her apartment, varying the times she went out, looking over her shoulder more often than she realized. But the stranger seemed to adapt. 2 weeks later, she received a text from an unknown number. "Nice sweater today." She froze. It was not threatening in itself, just unsettling. Another text came the next day. "I like the way you smile at that old bookstore." Her stomach twisted. She had not given out her number to anyone. No one she knew should know this much about her. The texts continued, and the observations became more detailed. He or she, though Madeline assumed it was a man, knew her habits, what cafes she frequented, when she went to the park, when she walked home from work. She blocked the number. New numbers appeared. She changed her social media handles, her email addresses, even her phone number. It did not stop. Every time she tried to cut him off, he found another way in. By December, the stalker escalated. Packages appeared. A single book she had loved in college, a scarf she had worn to a friend's wedding, a pressed flower from her favorite park bench. Each item was accompanied by a short note. "I saw you here. Remember this?" Each time, Madeline felt a deepening fear she could not explain to anyone. She did not call the police immediately, afraid of being dismissed, but she began documenting everything in a folder on her computer. She confided in her friend Jenna, who lived nearby. Jenna's reaction was alarm and disbelief that anyone could be so invasive. "You need a restraining order," Jenna said. "You need to protect yourself before this gets worse." Madeline nodded, but could not summon the courage to follow through yet. She felt trapped between a desire for normalcy and the creeping intrusion that had become her life. By mid-January, the stalker had learned her work schedule. Someone would wait near her office in the morning, lingering outside her window for just long enough that she noticed but could not identify the person. Texts continued. "You left the building late today. Did anyone see you?" She no longer walked alone at night, avoided her favorite cafes, and had begun sleeping with her doors locked, windows closed, and lights on. Every sound in the building, a creak in the stairwell, a tap against her window, made her heart jump. Finally, after another Polaroid appeared in her mailbox, this one showing her father standing on the porch of her childhood home. Madeline called the police. She reported every text, package, and photograph. The detective she spoke to was sympathetic, but warned her that without a direct threat or evidence of physical intrusion, options were limited. She was advised to document everything, install cameras, and continue with her restraining order proceedings. Despite these measures, the stalker's presence remained. He learned to skirt legal boundaries, standing just outside the 6-foot limit of her restraining order, sending messages indirectly through social media friends, appearing in places she frequented under the guise of coincidence. He was patient, methodical, and frighteningly intimate with her life. Madeline's sleep deteriorated. She started carrying pepper spray and a small personal alarm, sleeping with the phone under her pillow. She began varying her routines so carefully that even she sometimes forgot the patterns. She moved her furniture around frequently, changed locks multiple times, and installed cameras at every entrance. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, became a fortress. By March, she was exhausted and anxious all the time. At night, she would hear small noises, someone tapping the stairwell, footsteps outside her door, the faint shuffle of a bag along the hall. Every time her phone buzzed with an unknown number, her pulse skyrocketed. The stalker's communications became briefer but more menacing. "I'm close. You can't hide. I see everything." One evening, while walking home from the grocery store, she noticed a man across the street, standing in the shadows, watching her. He was tall, wearing a gray coat and hat, and remained motionless. She crossed the street, then another, trying to lose him. By the time she reached her building, he had vanished. She called the police, but there was nothing to report. No car, no identification, no witnesses. She began to fear leaving the apartment altogether. Even brief trips became calculated, checking the street, looking for signs of surveillance, carrying her pepper spray at all times. Jenna suggested she stay with her, but Madeline wanted to maintain some semblance of independence. She moved cautiously, feeling like prey in her own city. The stalker's tactics evolved further. Packages were now left with increasingly personal items: a scarf she had knitted for her mother, a notebook she had written in years ago. Each note hinted at knowing intimate, private details. You like your coffee strong in the morning. You hum when you think no one is listening. The psychological toll was immense. She could not focus at work. She could not sleep. She could not trust anyone outside a small circle. By summer, she had installed multiple cameras around her apartment and began recording every step she took in public spaces. She hired a private investigator who confirmed that a man fitting the stalker's description had been seen near her building, following her in the park, lingering near her office. The man was careful, avoiding detection, blending into the crowd, always just out of reach of law enforcement. The investigator warned that he was intelligent, experienced, and persistent. The stalker escalated again in September. He began sending letters to her family, asking about her schedule, inquiring about her habits. Her parents were terrified but wanted to protect her without making her life feel smaller. Her father offered to move her to a new apartment across the state, but she refused. She wanted her life to remain hers, even as it had been invaded. By October, she received a photograph of herself at the grocery store, taken from across the street. This time, the stalker had captured her in motion, unaware of the camera, completely vulnerable. The message with the photograph was simple: "You cannot escape me." It was a turning point for Madeline. She realized that staying put, no matter how fortified, could not entirely remove him from her life. Madeline moved again, this time out of state, to Seattle. She changed her phone number, her social media handles, and her address. For a brief period, she felt relief. But she soon received a photograph of her new apartment, taken through the window of a neighboring building. Her new number was compromised as well. The stalker had adapted, finding new ways to follow, new ways to invade. She worked with the police, filing another restraining order. This time, they monitored the situation more closely, aware of the stalker's persistence. She installed high-tech security systems, surveillance cameras, and alarms. She joined a support group for victims of stalking and learned tactics for dealing with persistent harassers. Her life became an intricate balance between survival and attempting to reclaim normalcy. Despite the fear, Madeline refused to be paralyzed. She continued to work, making connections cautiously, carefully trusting new friends. She learned to recognize signs of her stalker's influence, to document every encounter, every photograph, every message. Her vigilance became her lifeline. Years passed. The stalker continued to make occasional appearances in her life through letters, anonymous messages, or sightings. But law enforcement was now able to respond more effectively, and the pattern of harassment was documented thoroughly. She moved several more times, each time more aware, more prepared. Her life became a careful navigation between freedom and safety. Madeline learned to live with the knowledge that someone had invaded her privacy to an extraordinary degree, that the fear had changed her, but had not broken her. She built routines that allowed her to function, to enjoy the world in controlled doses, to trust cautiously, but live nonetheless. Every camera, every lock, every recorded conversation was both a shield and a reminder of her past trauma. Eventually, the stalker faded from her immediate surroundings. She continued her work, nurtured friendships, and even began a new relationship, careful with boundaries, but hopeful. The memories of being watched, of the small invasions, never fully left her, but they became part of her story, not the entirety of it. She learned resilience in ways few could understand, the quiet strength of a life rebuilt in the shadow of obsession. Even now, when she walks alone through a city park or sits in a coffee shop, she sometimes glances at strangers just slightly too long, measures the distance of passersby, and feels the old surge of alertness. It is a memory etched into her muscles and mind. But she breathes, she moves forward, and she continues to live. Her story is one of survival, vigilance, and reclaiming life from the shadow of fear. Story, the end. It began on an ordinary Tuesday in mid-July, the kind of day that feels harmless until it isn't. My name is Claire, and I lived alone in a small apartment in the suburbs of Chicago. I was 28, recently promoted at a marketing firm, and had moved into the apartment a few months earlier. My building was older, brick, 3 stories, with a narrow parking lot and a chain-link fence surrounding the perimeter. On paper, it seemed safe, quiet, perfect for someone who liked routine and solitude. The first incident was subtle, almost laughable at the time. I had just returned from work and was walking up the small staircase to my unit when I noticed a sticky note on my door. It read, "You're late tonight." I froze, reading it twice. I hadn't known anyone in the building well enough to leave me notes, and the handwriting didn't match anyone I knew. I crumpled it and threw it in the trash, telling myself it was a prank by some kid from the floor below. That night, I double-checked the locks on all my doors and windows, even though I usually did anyway. I didn't sleep well, but I convinced myself it was nothing. 2 days later, another note appeared, taped to the doorframe this time. "Nice outfit today." I panicked. This was too precise. Whoever it was had been watching me. My heart raced as I considered the possibility that someone was following me. I started leaving work later, hoping to avoid anyone who might be watching my schedule. Then came the first photo. I opened my mailbox to find a Polaroid tucked inside. It was me, walking up the steps to my apartment that very afternoon, my briefcase in one hand, my bag slung over my shoulder. On the back, written in sharp, deliberate letters, "I saw you." I took it straight to the police. They listened politely, filed a report, but admitted there wasn't much they could do without a clear suspect. They suggested I install cameras and alert the building management. I did both. The property manager seemed concerned at first, but had no experience dealing with harassment or stalking. The cameras were placed inside and outside the apartment, angled to capture anyone approaching my door or peeking through windows. I thought I was finally safe. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I told myself the notes and photo were probably from some bored teenager or a neighbor with a twisted sense of humor. But one night, at around 1:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. I froze, straining to listen. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight toward the window. A shadow moved in the narrow alley behind the building. I couldn't see much, just a tall figure wearing dark clothes crouched near the window. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked. I watched from my bedroom window, trembling as the figure disappeared into the shadows before police arrived. The officers found no one. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. They left me with instructions to remain vigilant. After that night, I couldn't stay in the apartment. I packed a small bag and stayed with my friend Jenna for a week. I barely slept, haunted by the thought that someone had been outside my window watching me sleep. When I finally returned, I installed extra locks and motion sensor lights outside every door and window. I also started keeping my curtains closed at all times, even during the day. Despite my precautions, the harassment escalated. It started with messages on my social media accounts I rarely used and had set to private. "Nice hair today, Claire. I like the way you walk. You're so pretty when you're scared." I blocked the accounts, reported them, but new ones would appear within hours. The messages were always precise, often describing my movements or my outfit for the day. Whoever this person was, they were tracking me. One night, I was sitting on my couch, laptop open, trying to ignore the stress. My motion sensors went off, lights outside flashing. I ran to the window, heart pounding. A figure was standing in the alley behind the building, hood up, head tilted as if watching me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 again. By the time police arrived, the figure was gone, leaving only wet footprints that ended abruptly at the fence. The police suggested I consider moving. I didn't want to believe it had come to that, but I knew they were right. Before I could make any plans, I found an envelope under my door. Inside was a Polaroid of me in the grocery store parking lot, taken just a few hours earlier. The handwriting on the back read, "I see everything you do." I panicked. I showed the photo to the police, who filed it as part of my ongoing case. The local authorities increased patrols in the area, but nothing concrete came from it. I decided to take action myself. I bought a cheap spy camera and started recording my daily movements from inside the apartment. I hoped to catch the stalker in the act. A few nights later, my camera captured something horrifying. I was asleep when the doorbell rang. I didn't answer, but the camera recorded a man crouched near my door, wearing a white mask, a hoodie, and gloves. He pressed his ear to the door as if listening for movement, then slipped away into the darkness. I felt violated in every way possible. My safe space was no longer mine. I packed my bags immediately and left for Jenna's again. This time I stayed there for nearly a month. Eventually, I found a small apartment in a different part of town. New locks, new numbers, new routines. I tried to rebuild my life, but anxiety followed me everywhere. I would check over my shoulder constantly, jump at small noises, and sometimes freeze in the middle of the street thinking someone was watching me. Then came the letters in the mail. Simple white envelopes with no return address. Inside, Polaroids of me walking down my new street, leaving the office, even sitting in my apartment at night. The captions were always short. "I know where you are. You can't hide. Watching you now." I realized then that distance didn't matter. He had been following me from the very beginning, tracking my patterns, my routines. He knew where I lived, worked, ate, and slept. I involved the police again, this time with a detective specializing in stalking cases. They traced some of the mail, leading to a man who lived several miles from my original apartment. He had multiple burner phones, cameras, disguises, and an obsession with women in the area. When they arrested him, they found dozens of photos, notes detailing my movements, my personal information, and even sketches of my apartment layout. I finally felt some relief. He was in custody, facing multiple charges, including stalking and harassment. But the trauma remained. I couldn't sleep alone. I couldn't leave my apartment without fear, and even the simplest sounds, the rustle of leaves, a footstep in the hall, made my heart race. Years later, I still live cautiously. My doors are double locked, my blinds are always closed, and I avoid predictable routines. The police tell me he's behind bars, that I'm safe. But sometimes when I'm walking down a quiet street or driving at night, I swear I see someone in a hoodie watching me from a distance, and for a split second, the fear comes rushing back as if it never left. Story the end. Alyssa Hart had always considered herself careful. Living alone in a modest apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, she had routines: morning jogs, evening grocery runs, late nights designing interiors for her clients. At 27, she enjoyed her independence, her quiet life, and her sense of control. That sense of control shattered on a cold November evening. It started with small, almost dismissible incidents. She returned from a late dinner to find her apartment door slightly ajar, the lock undisturbed. At first, she thought she'd left it unlocked in a rush, but a creeping unease settled in her chest. She double-checked her doors, set her security system, and tried to brush it off. 2 nights later, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a small framed photograph of her sitting in the park during her lunch break, her laptop open, headphones in. She hadn't noticed anyone photographing her. Alyssa's hands shook as she held the photo. Someone had been watching her. She called the police, who advised her to keep a record of any suspicious activity, but without a direct threat, there was little they could do. She began varying her routine, taking different routes to work, jogging in different parks, keeping her blinds closed, but it seemed the more she tried to disappear, the closer he, or whoever it was, crept. Texts followed. "Nice jacket today. Saw you at the cafe. You were alone." Each message was sent from an unknown number, appearing to track her movements in real time. Alyssa changed her number multiple times, but the messages continued, each more precise than the last. One evening, returning from a late shift, she noticed a man leaning against a lamppost several blocks from her building. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and didn't move as she approached. Her pulse quickened. By the time she reached her door, he was gone. The next day, she found another photo slipped under her door, this time of her entering her building. She realized he had learned the pattern of her life. Alyssa confided in her roommate, Marissa, who urged her to move immediately. Alyssa was reluctant. She had invested in this apartment and had no desire to uproot her life. But the presence of a stalker became undeniable. She installed cameras, upgraded her locks, and began leaving her apartment only with a friend when possible. Despite these precautions, the stalker escalated. Personal items appeared: a scarf she had worn the previous winter, a notebook she had left at a cafe months earlier, even a pen she had given to a friend. Each item was accompanied by a note. "I know what this means to you. Remember when you laughed here?" The messages were chillingly intimate. Sleep became impossible. Alyssa left lights on and double-checked locks multiple times. Every noise outside, footsteps in the hall, a knock at the door, triggered panic. She started carrying pepper spray and a small baseball bat when leaving her apartment, her world shrinking into a fortress of hyper-vigilance. She enlisted the help of a private investigator. Surveillance footage confirmed a man matching the stalker's description, following her in public, always careful to remain unnoticed, blending into crowds, always present yet just out of reach. The PI warned Alyssa that this person was organized, patient, and highly invasive. Her stalker also began targeting people close to her. She received photos of her parents' house, her favorite cafe, and her friends, with notes indicating he had observed them too. The scope of his intrusion expanded, and fear became a constant companion. She could no longer trust the streets, her home, or even casual acquaintances. In March, Alyssa decided she had to leave. She found a temporary apartment across town, changed her number, email, and social media handles. For a short time, it seemed to work. No messages, no sightings. Relief was fleeting. One morning, she found a single Polaroid tucked into her mailbox. Her new apartment, her bedroom window, a figure blurred in the background. The stalker had found her again. Determined not to be paralyzed by fear, Alyssa worked with the police to file a restraining order and continued documenting every incident meticulously. She upgraded her security system with cameras covering all entrances, connected to a service monitored 24/7. She learned to spot suspicious behaviors in public, developed escape plans, and created layers of safety. Months passed with minor incidents: anonymous letters, photos taken from a distance, occasional texts. But Alyssa refused to surrender her life entirely. She continued working, cautiously dating, and rebuilt routines that allowed her to function without constant terror. Each precaution was a reminder of the past, but also a shield against it. Eventually, the stalker's presence became intermittent. Alyssa never fully relaxed, but she regained enough control to live a life with measured freedom. She remained vigilant, aware that someone had breached her privacy in ways most people could not comprehend. She had been watched, invaded, and pursued relentlessly, but she had survived. Years later, she could walk the city streets with relative confidence, her cameras and alarms a part of her life, her friends and family aware of the precautions. She had learned resilience, the quiet power of reclaiming her life after being hunted. The memory of those terrifying months remained a shadow she carried, but no longer allowed to define her. Alyssa Hart had faced fear at its most intimate and invasive, yet she had endured. Every step outside her apartment, every cautious glance at strangers, was a reminder that vigilance was necessary, but so was survival. Life, she realized, was about moving forward, even when the past was watching. Story the end. Claire Reynolds was used to her quiet life in suburban Denver. At 29, she had settled into a rhythm she cherished. Mornings at the local gym, afternoons managing a small boutique marketing firm, evenings curled up with a book or cooking elaborate dinners for herself. Her apartment complex was modest, lined with maple trees that blazed orange in the fall. She felt safe, or so she thought. It began subtly in late September. One evening, Claire returned home from a yoga class and noticed her mailbox slightly ajar. Inside was a small note with her name, written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. "I like watching you from afar." Her first thought was prank, but a cold knot of unease formed in her stomach. She crumpled the note and threw it away, trying to dismiss it as random mischief. A week later, a package arrived at her door, a small potted plant accompanied by a Polaroid of her standing at the apartment complex entrance earlier that day. She froze, clutching the photograph. Someone had been watching her, and they had documented her movements. Fear replaced annoyance. Claire contacted the building manager to see if any deliveries had been misdelivered, but there were none. Her routine became cautious. She varied the time she left for the gym, avoided her usual running path, and kept her apartment locked even when home. Yet the incidents escalated. Unknown numbers began texting her, "You were smiling at the coffee shop today. I saw you in the park yesterday, alone." Each message confirmed that someone was tracking her life in real time. By November, Claire began documenting every incident. She installed cameras at every entrance, replaced her locks, and carried pepper spray in her bag at all times. The stalker adapted, learning her new routines and sending messages with chilling accuracy. "You left your office at 5:17. Did anyone see you?" She confided in her friend and neighbor, Lydia, who urged Claire to involve law enforcement. The police took her seriously this time and advised her to gather evidence, avoid interacting with the stalker, and continue documenting. Despite these precautions, the stalker found ways to circumvent them. Photos appeared in her mailbox of places she frequented: the grocery store, the park, even a library where she occasionally worked. Each photograph was accompanied by a note referencing intimate details. "You love that bench because of the sunlight." Sleep became impossible. Claire could no longer leave her apartment unaccompanied. Even trips to the corner store were fraught with anxiety. She became hyper-aware of her surroundings, noticing people who lingered too long or seemed to appear in multiple locations she visited. Her social life dwindled, her independence eroded by fear. By January, the stalker escalated further. He, or she, sent letters to her parents asking about Claire's schedule and habits. The intrusion into her family's life terrified her, prompting her to hire a private investigator. Surveillance footage revealed a man matching the stalker's description following Claire, always careful to avoid direct confrontation, blending into crowds, always present yet undetectable at critical moments. Claire realized she could no longer remain in her apartment safely. She moved to a new city, changed her phone number, email, and social media accounts, but relief was fleeting. Within weeks, a Polaroid of her new apartment arrived, showing her bedroom window. The accompanying note read, "I found you." Determined not to surrender completely, Claire filed a restraining order and continued documenting every incident. She upgraded her home security system, installed motion sensor cameras, and learned techniques to detect suspicious behavior in public spaces. She joined a support group for stalking victims and discovered ways to reclaim some control over her life. Months turned into years. The stalker's presence never disappeared entirely, but became sporadic. Claire cautiously rebuilt her life, returning to her favorite cafes, exercising outdoors, and developing new friendships. Each step forward was measured, each encounter carefully navigated. She learned to live with the knowledge that someone had violated her privacy in ways most could not comprehend. Though the fear lingered, Claire survived. She maintained vigilance while reclaiming her independence. Life continued, shaped but not dominated by her experience. She had been watched, followed, and harassed, yet she endured, adapting to the reality that the world could hold unseen threats. Claire Reynolds emerged stronger, resilient, and aware. The past remained a shadow, but it no longer controlled her. Every careful step outside her apartment, every cautious glance at strangers, was proof that she had survived something few could understand: the slow, terrifying invasion of a stalker who knew her better than she knew herself. Story the end. It began the fall after I turned 30. My name is Aaron, and I just moved to Portland, Oregon after getting a new job at a tech company downtown. I didn't know many people there. I'd left most of my friends behind in Seattle, and I was renting a small one-bedroom apartment in an old brick building just outside the city center. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was starting over. The first time I noticed him, it was nothing special. Just a man I'd see occasionally, at the bus stop, in the lobby of my building, or walking down the same street as me. He looked ordinary enough: brown jacket, ball cap, maybe mid-30s. He'd always seemed to be looking at something else, but every so often, when I turned my head too quickly, I'd catch him staring. Just for a second. I convinced myself it was nothing. People notice each other in cities all the time. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find a note wedged into my doorframe. It said, "You looked really happy today." I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was from a neighbor or a delivery driver trying to flirt. But the handwriting was strange, carefully printed, deliberate. I tossed it away and forgot about it. Then, 2 days later, another note appeared. "You shouldn't walk alone at night." That one made me stop cold. I hadn't told anyone about my evening walks, and I always took a quiet route through a residential area. I started keeping the blinds closed, locking the door earlier than usual, checking the peephole before going to bed. It was late October when things escalated. I had just gotten home after an evening out with coworkers. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed something glinting under the streetlight: a Polaroid photo lying on the ground next to my parking spot. It was me, taken from behind, walking into the building, my long coat trailing behind me. On the back, it said, "You looked beautiful tonight." I went straight inside, shaking. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I called the police. The officer who came was calm, sympathetic. He took the photo, filed a report, told me to keep an eye out, and maybe install security cameras. That night, I barely slept. Every noise felt amplified: the hum of the fridge, the creak of the pipes, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. A week went by with no new notes or photos, and I almost convinced myself it was over. Then, just after Thanksgiving, I came home to find an envelope slid halfway under my door. Inside was another photo, this time of me sitting in my car in the morning, drinking coffee before work. On the back, "You looked sad today. Why?" That's when I knew I was being watched constantly. I installed cameras the next day, one at the front door, one near the back alley window. My landlord wasn't happy about it, but I didn't care. I changed my routes, started carpooling with a coworker when I could. Still, he found ways to let me know he was there. Sometimes I'd find small objects outside my door: a single flower, a candy wrapper, once even a lock of what looked like hair tied with a red string. Sometimes I'd hear faint footsteps in the hallway late at night, stopping right outside my apartment, then retreating. I stopped going out after dark. I barely slept. I was constantly on edge, jumpy at every sound. Then, one morning, I woke to a notification from my security camera. Motion detected, 2:37 a.m. I opened the app. A man in a brown jacket and baseball cap stood in front of my door. He leaned close to the peephole as if listening, then reached up and gently touched the doorknob. After a few seconds, he slipped something under the door and walked away. I didn't move until the sun came up. When I finally opened the door, there was a Polaroid lying on the floor. It was me, asleep in my bed. My heart nearly stopped. I called the police immediately, but when they arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. I showed them the footage. They confirmed it was the same man from before, but his face was partially hidden. They promised to increase patrols in the area. I spent the next week staying with my friend Melissa across town. I was terrified to go home. When I finally did, I brought 2 coworkers with me. We searched the apartment top to bottom. Nothing seemed disturbed: no broken locks, no hidden cameras, nothing missing. It made no sense how he'd gotten the photo. I considered moving, but money was tight and the lease still had months left. I tried to live normally, though normal was impossible. By January, the messages changed. They became more desperate, more personal. Why are you avoiding me? You don't have to be scared. I just want to be close to you. Then one morning, I found my bedroom window cracked open, just a few inches. I hadn't opened it. On the sill was another photo. Me, brushing my teeth. I remember dropping to the floor, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. He'd been inside my apartment. The detective handling my case put surveillance on my building. 2 nights later, around 2 a.m., they caught him. He was crouched behind the dumpsters, holding a camera and a set of my stolen keys. His name was Alex. He worked at a convenience store near my office. I'd gone there a few times, small talk over coffee, nothing more. Apparently, that was enough for him to fixate. When police searched his apartment, they found hundreds of photos of me, eating, sleeping, driving, working, and detailed notes on my daily life. There were even recordings of me talking on the phone, taken through the walls. He was arrested for stalking, trespassing, and unlawful surveillance. I testified at the hearing, barely able to look at him. He didn't speak, just stared, his expression flat and cold. He was sentenced to 7 years. The detective said I should feel safe now, but I didn't. I moved cities again, changed my name on social media, and started therapy. Even now, years later, I still double-check every door, every window, every shadow. Sometimes when I'm walking home at night, I swear I feel eyes on me, steady, familiar, patient. And in the silence, I can almost hear his voice whispering the words from that first note, "You looked really happy today." Story the end. Natalie Brooks had always prided herself on her independence. At 26, she had recently moved into a small but charming apartment in Austin, Texas, downtown close to the university where she taught part-time. Her days were filled with lectures, grading papers, and evenings spent at her favorite coffee shops sketching designs for her freelance interior work. She liked the quiet predictability of her life until it began to unravel. It started with small signs that something was off. One evening, she returned from a late-night coffee run to find her door slightly ajar. Her heart raced, but the locks were intact, the door secure. She chalked it up to exhaustion, or perhaps forgetting to close it fully herself. But when she found a small piece of paper tucked under the door the next morning, her stomach dropped. "I saw you leave last night. You looked beautiful." The note's handwriting was precise, careful. Whoever left it had been watching her. Panic fluttered at the edges of her mind, but she tried to dismiss it, locking her door more carefully and checking her surroundings when leaving. Yet, the stalker escalated quickly. Weeks later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo of her sitting at her favorite park, sketchbook open, headphones in. She hadn't noticed anyone taking it. The feeling of violation struck her like a physical blow. Her apartment, once her sanctuary, felt exposed. She contacted the police and reported the incidents, but without a direct threat, there was little they could do. They suggested documenting everything, which she began meticulously. Texts from unknown numbers started arriving. "I saw you at the cafe today. You smiled at that man by the window. I like the way you twirl your hair when you think no one is watching." Her number changed, yet new numbers appeared. Social media accounts were altered to private, but the messages found their way in anyway. Natalie became hypervigilant. She avoided her usual routes, left home at different times, and carried pepper spray and a small alarm in her bag. She installed cameras around her apartment and even borrowed security devices for temporary monitoring. Still, the stalker adapted, appearing at grocery stores, the gym, and the library, always close enough to be noticed but far enough to avoid confrontation. Her friends grew concerned. When she confided in her roommate, Lisa, the advice was clear. Move, get a restraining order, involve the authorities fully. Natalie hesitated. She did not want to abandon her home or her routines. But the stalker's actions were escalating. Personal items began appearing. A scarf she had worn months earlier, a notebook she had left at a cafe, even a small trinket from her childhood home. Each item came with a note referencing intimate knowledge. "I remember you said this was your favorite park bench." Sleep became impossible. Every creak in the apartment, every shadow, sparked fear. She left lights on all night, checked locks repeatedly, and avoided going out alone. Her life narrowed to work, home, and her closest friends' company. She hired a private investigator who confirmed that a man matching the stalker's description had been seen trailing her through the city, blending into crowds, always present but never caught in direct confrontation. By March, the stalker's harassment extended beyond her. Letters arrived at her parents' house asking about her schedule and routines. This intrusion into her family's life terrified her. Desperate for safety, Natalie moved to a new apartment across town, changed her number, email, and social media handles. For a brief time, she felt relief, but not for long. A single Polaroid arrived showing her bedroom window from the outside. The accompanying note read, "I know where you are." Panic returned in full force. She filed for a restraining order and worked with law enforcement to set up surveillance, ensuring that every potential entry point was monitored. She joined a support group for victims of stalking, learning tactics to detect suspicious behavior in public and ways to reclaim some control over her life. Months turned into years. The stalker's presence became intermittent, but Natalie could never fully relax. She rebuilt her routines carefully, returning to favorite coffee shops, exercising outdoors, and slowly expanding her social circle. Each precaution was a reminder of the past, but also a shield against it. Natalie learned to live with the awareness that someone had invaded her life, observing her every movement and learning her habits with frightening precision. Yet she survived, resilient and determined not to let fear dominate her. Her independence, though tempered by vigilance, endured. Even years later, she remained careful. Glances over her shoulder were habitual, locks checked twice, cameras maintained. The shadow of the stalker lingered, a persistent reminder of her trauma. But Natalie Brooks had reclaimed her life. She had been watched, harassed, and pursued relentlessly, yet she continued to move forward, vigilant but free, within the boundaries she had created for herself. Story the end. It started the week I moved into my first house alone. My name is Rachel. I was 28 and I had just left a long-term relationship. I wanted space, a fresh start, so I bought a small single-story house on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older couples and a few young families. I loved it. Tree-lined streets, birds in the morning, the soft hum of suburbia. The first warning came 2 nights after I moved in. I was unpacking boxes when I heard a soft knock at the back door. I lived alone and didn't expect anyone, so I froze. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. A chill ran down my spine. I shrugged it off as nerves, the adjustment of moving into a new place. The next morning, I found a small envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a Polaroid photo of my house, taken from the street from an angle only someone walking by could get. On the back, scrawled in messy handwriting, were the words, "I like your house." I felt my stomach drop. Who would do this? And how had they known I'd just moved in? I called the local police. They took the photo, said they'd patrol the area, and advised me to install cameras. I bought a simple security system and mounted cameras near the front and back doors. I also made sure all my windows and doors were locked every night. For a few weeks, nothing happened. I tried to tell myself the incident had been a one-off, maybe a prank from a neighbor or someone driving by. But then the notes started. At first, they were small, almost benign. "You have a nice garden," or "Your dog is cute." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't recognize the handwriting. The person left them slipped under the door, sometimes tucked behind a flower pot, sometimes on my porch step. Then the Polaroids came again. One afternoon, I returned from work and found a photo on my welcome mat. It was me, walking from my car toward the house, keys in hand. Written on the back, "I see you every day." I panicked. Whoever this was, they had been watching me. I called the police again, and they suggested I take extra precautions, maybe even stay with a friend for a while. I stayed with my friend Lisa for a few nights, but the fear didn't leave me. A week later, I returned home. My car was scratched, just a faint line along the driver's side door. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Someone had been close enough to touch it. I installed motion sensor lights along the driveway and around the house. I set up a second set of cameras, some visible and some hidden. I also got a dog, small but alert, and kept pepper spray near my bed. Despite my precautions, the harassment escalated. Late one night, I was sitting in the living room when I heard faint tapping at the window. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, holding my breath. The tapping stopped. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras. There he was, a man in a dark hoodie, crouched near the window, face obscured. He lingered for several minutes before slipping into the shadows. I called 911. Police arrived quickly, but he was gone. They found footprints in the grass leading away from the house. He had been there, close enough to peer into my windows. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag and went to Lisa's. I slept lightly, always checking the locks and blinds, feeling watched even in her house. Over the next few months, the stalker continued. Photos in the mailbox, notes tucked under the door, emails from unknown accounts with subject lines like, "I know where you are," or "You can't hide." I changed my routines, my phone number, my social media, but he always found ways to reach me. The final incident happened one night in March. I was asleep when I heard the back door creak. My dog barked furiously, waking me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location. Through the security app, I could see him. Same dark hoodie, mask covering his face, moving through my kitchen. He paused near the back door, then disappeared before the police arrived. After that, I involved a detective specializing in stalking cases. Weeks later, they arrested him, a man named Thomas, living a few streets away. In his apartment, police found dozens of photos of me, detailed notes about my routines, my friends, my grocery runs, even sketches of my house. There were cameras hidden around my previous neighborhood, recordings of me walking to my car, everything meticulously planned. He was charged with stalking, harassment, and attempted burglary. The detective told me he'd been fixated on me since I moved in. I moved again, this time to a different city entirely. New job, new apartment, new routines. Therapy helped me cope, but I never feel entirely safe. Even years later, I double-check locks, watch the shadows, and sometimes when I think no one is around, I swear I see a figure at the edge of my vision. The memory of those photos, the notes, and the feeling of being watched haunts me still. Some nights, I wake in the middle of the night, convinced he's standing outside my window, just watching, waiting. Story the end. It started when I moved into my new apartment in Seattle. I was 26, single, and finally earning enough to afford a small place on my own. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a building that overlooked a small coffee shop and a narrow alley. I liked that it felt private. I could work from home, read on my balcony, and watch the city lights flicker at night. For the first few weeks, everything felt perfect. I had friendly neighbors, the barista downstairs already knew my order, and I was starting to feel at home in the city. But then, small things started to happen. Things that didn't make sense at first. One morning, I woke up and found my balcony door slightly open. I always kept it locked. I told myself I must have forgotten, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't. A few days later, I came home to find my shoes arranged differently by the door. I lived alone. I brushed it off again, but the unease began to creep in. The first real sign came 2 weeks later. I was heading out for work and found an envelope taped to my apartment door. Inside was a photograph of me. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring coffee, wearing the same pajamas I had on just 3 days earlier. The photo had been taken through my balcony window. My heart stopped. I ran inside, closed every blind, and called the police. They came, looked around, but didn't find any signs of forced entry. They said it could have been someone from a neighboring building playing a prank, but there was nothing funny about it. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. The creak of the pipes, footsteps in the hall, even the hum of the fridge made my pulse race. The next day, another envelope appeared. This one contained 2 photos, one of me leaving for work and one of me returning. The words, "You look nice when you smile," were written on the back. I told my landlord, and he agreed to change the locks and install an extra security camera near my door. I bought motion lights and even put a chair under the doorknob at night. I thought that would make me feel safer. It didn't. A week later, while getting ready for bed, I noticed something strange on the balcony. A small mark near the sliding door frame, like a scratch where a lockpick might have been used. My chest tightened. Whoever this was had tried to get inside. I went to stay with my friend Amanda for a few days. She lived across town in a high-rise with security and cameras. I felt better there, but even at her place, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being followed. When we went out for groceries, I noticed a man in a dark hoodie standing by the parking lot, just staring at me. Amanda said I was just paranoid, that the stress was getting to me. I wanted to believe her. When I finally returned home, I checked my cameras. The first few nights were quiet, but on the fourth night, I woke up to an alert on my phone. The motion sensor on my balcony had gone off. I opened the live feed and froze. There was a man standing just outside the glass door, his face obscured by a mask. He was holding a phone, the screen faintly glowing in the dark. He was recording me through the window. I screamed, grabbed my phone, and called 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I locked myself in the bathroom. I could hear faint tapping on the glass as I whispered my address. When the police arrived, he was gone. But they found a few of his belongings left behind: a cigarette butt, a piece of torn fabric from his sleeve caught on the balcony latch, and, worst of all, another photograph of me asleep in bed. The police launched a full investigation. They believed he'd been watching me for weeks, learning my habits. One officer told me to consider moving immediately. I agreed. I packed my things that night and stayed with Amanda again. But even after I left, the harassment didn't stop. I started receiving emails from an anonymous account. The messages said things like, "You shouldn't have left," and "I can still see you." I changed my email, my phone number, even deleted all my social media. A few days later, a package arrived at Amanda's building, addressed to me. Inside was another Polaroid, me walking into her building lobby, taken from across the street. I cried that night. I felt trapped, like there was nowhere I could go where he wouldn't find me. The police advised me to file for a restraining order, but they couldn't issue one without identifying the suspect. The only clue they had was the man's mask and jacket caught briefly on my security footage. Then came the night he broke in. I was at Amanda's, home alone while she was out. I heard a faint rustle near the window, like someone brushing against the blinds. My heart stopped. I turned off the lights and crept toward the sound. There was a shadow outside, moving slowly across the glass. Then I heard it, the sound of metal scraping against the latch. He was trying to open the window. I grabbed my phone and ran into the bathroom again, locking the door and dialing 911. I could hear him now. Heavy footsteps on the carpet, the creak of floorboards. He was inside. I whispered to the operator, praying the police would come in time. The minutes stretched endlessly. Then the bathroom doorknob started to turn, slowly, deliberately. I screamed, clutching the phone, when suddenly I heard shouting. Police officers. They burst through the front door and tackled him before he could get to me. It was the same man from the footage, a 38-year-old maintenance worker from my building. He had keys to every apartment. When they searched his belongings, they found dozens of photos of me, screenshots of my online profiles, and a folder full of printed schedules of my daily routines. He had been following me for months, slipping into my apartment while I was gone, taking pictures and leaving before I returned. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and breaking and entering. He pled guilty. After that, I moved again. This time, across the state. I changed my name on social media, got a new job, and never told anyone where I lived. I installed cameras in every corner of my new home, triple-checked my locks, and kept a bat by my bed. Even now, years later, I still can't sleep if I hear tapping on a window or footsteps in a hallway. Sometimes I'll wake in the middle of the night and feel like someone's standing just outside, watching. The police told me he's still in prison, but deep down, I know that fear never really leaves you. When you've been watched that closely, followed that quietly, it changes something inside you. I still live alone. I still check my balcony door 3 times every night. And sometimes when I look out at the street below and see a man standing there staring up, I can't help but wonder, what if it's starting all over again? Story the end. The first time Emma noticed him was on a Thursday evening in late October. She had just finished her shift at the coffee shop in downtown Portland and was walking her usual route home, earbuds in, phone out, letting herself drift through playlists she didn't fully listen to. The streetlights were flickering, one after another, and the crisp air had that hint of rain that made the city smell alive. She saw him across the street, leaning against a lamppost, dark hoodie pulled over his head, hands in his pockets. He didn't move, just stared at her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. She looked away and quickened her pace, convinced it was just a coincidence. People watched others all the time. That's normal, right? But the next evening, he was there again, at the bus stop across from her apartment. This time she noticed the same hoodie, the same shadowed face, the same unyielding stare. Her gut screamed at her to cross the street, to duck into a store, to call someone, but she couldn't. Something about the way he just waited unsettled her. He didn't move when she did. He didn't get on a bus. He just remained there, a fixture in her evening, like he belonged to the darkness. Days passed. Emma tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he had a waiting game with the bus. Maybe it was coincidence. But coincidences have a limit, and Emma's rationality faltered the night she came home from work to find her apartment door slightly ajar. She never forgot the sound of the door, the subtle scraping against the frame, that almost imperceptible shift in her otherwise familiar hallway. Her apartment was small, cozy, and meticulously clean. Nothing else seemed out of place, yet her stomach dropped. She called 911 but told them nothing had been taken, nothing broken. They said they would increase patrols, but realistically, what could they do? Over the next few weeks, Emma noticed small, subtle changes. Packages she hadn't ordered appeared at her door. Notes slipped under her door. One read, "You're pretty when you're scared." Another, "I like watching you." She stopped sleeping. She stopped going on her usual evening walks. Her friends noticed. She smiled through lunches and coffee dates, but her eyes always darted. Her hands shook slightly when she reached for her phone. One night, she woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of her window shaking. Her bedroom was on the second floor, and she knew there was no way someone could be outside without her hearing. But the sound was unmistakable. Tapping, scratching, a rhythm that almost resembled deliberate pacing. Heart pounding, she grabbed her phone, dialed 911. When they arrived, the yard was empty. Her window was closed, her blinds drawn. Nothing. But the fear clung to her like a second skin. Emma began changing routines. She left for work at irregular hours, started parking blocks away, even started using different entrances in her office building. The man never appeared in person anymore, at least not directly, but his presence was everywhere. Shadows that didn't belong. The faint rustle of someone moving outside her apartment. The feeling of eyes on her back in the office kitchen. She installed cameras, locks, even motion sensor alarms. The footage showed nothing. Nothing except the blurry corner of a figure sometimes, fleeting, just enough to know he hadn't stopped. She confided in her closest friend, Mia, who tried to be reassuring. "You're not imagining it, Emma," she said. "But you can't let him win. Don't change your life for him. That's what they want." Emma wanted to believe her. She tried. She went out for dinner with friends, went to the movies, even joined a yoga class at a nearby studio. But the feeling never left. She was constantly scanning, constantly listening. And then, one Saturday night, the unthinkable happened. Emma returned from a late-night grocery run. Her car was parked normally, the doors locked, the interior dimly illuminated by the streetlight. She unlocked it, threw her bags in the back seat, and noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. A man standing across the street, perfectly still. Hood up, hands in pockets, staring. Her breath caught. She fumbled with her keys, backing away, heart hammering, and that's when she realized he wasn't alone. Across the street, in the shadows, another figure appeared. And then another. They were waiting. Not for something random, not for a coincidence. For her. Emma ran, left her car, sprinted down the street, screamed for help. A neighbor, an older man with a dog, came out. The figures scattered before he could intervene, slipping back into darkness like ghosts. Emma collapsed into the neighbor's arms, shaking uncontrollably. She called the police. This time, they took it seriously. Patrols increased. Officers came to her apartment. They ran plates. They suggested restraining orders, safety plans. But the men, or the man, remained unseen, like shadows that never fully materialized. Months passed. Emma moved apartments, changed her phone number, started taking self-defense classes. She changed her name on social media, limited her digital footprint. For a while, she convinced herself she was free. Then she received the package, a small, unassuming box left at her new door. Inside, a single Polaroid. Her apartment, taken from the window. Emma stopped leaving the apartment for weeks. Her friends visited, but she kept curtains drawn. She installed new locks, new security cameras, even a panic room, a small space in her apartment with reinforced walls and an emergency phone line. She slept there some nights, terrified of waking to someone inside her home. She began sleeping with a knife under her pillow. She kept pepper spray in her bag. She installed a security system with alerts sent to her phone. Yet every day, no matter what precautions she took, the sense of being watched never went away. She became hyper-aware, counting shadows, checking reflections, tracing footsteps. One evening, while checking the footage from her new cameras, she noticed movement outside. Not the usual shadows, not the usual glimpses. A figure lingered at the edge of the driveway, hoodie up, hands in pockets, watching. And then something she hadn't anticipated, his face visible for a fraction of a second. He smiled. Emma's hands shook. She called 911, but by the time officers arrived, the figure was gone. There was no evidence of entry, no fingerprints, no traces of footprints. But she knew. She knew he had been there. He always was. And then she realized something worse. The photos, the windows, the surveillance, they weren't enough. He didn't need to be caught. He just needed her to know he was there, that he could be anywhere. Weeks later, Emma started noticing small things in her apartment. Objects slightly moved, her toothbrush angled differently, a glass half full when she remembered filling it empty. At first, she thought she was losing her mind, but the details accumulated. He had found a way inside, even if the door was locked, even if the windows were secure. She never saw how, never saw the face, never saw the intruder. But the proof was undeniable. Someone was in her life, constant, invasive, knowing. She confided in the police, but without evidence, nothing could be done. Restraining orders, patrols, cameras, none of it stopped him. Emma started taking drastic precautions. She changed apartments again, moved cities. She left Portland for Seattle, thinking distance would matter. She changed her number, left her job, even left her social circle. But the patterns remained. Small notes, small packages, fleeting shadows. Always watching, always waiting. Years later, Emma lived in a small apartment in Seattle. Curtains always drawn, doors always locked. She avoided social media entirely. She rarely went out. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was silent, she felt it again. The gaze. The unmistakable, suffocating feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching her sleep. One night, she woke to the sound of her window shaking again. Her first instinct was panic, the old gut-wrenching fear. She reached for her phone, dialed 911, but hesitated. Because she knew, in her heart, that even if the police came, even if she screamed, he would vanish before they arrived. And maybe that was the point. She stayed awake for hours, listening, watching, every nerve alert. And then, finally, she fell asleep, only to wake an hour later to the sound of a camera shutter clicking softly somewhere in her apartment. She never saw his face again. She never knew his name, but she knew the truth. He was patient. He was meticulous. He was everywhere she wasn't, yet he always knew where she was. And he wasn't going anywhere. Story the end. Rachel had always thought of herself as careful. She lived alone in a small Portland apartment, worked long hours at a graphic design firm, and spent most evenings catching up on TV shows or scrolling through social media. Safety was a given, until it wasn't. It began subtly. On a Tuesday night, she walked home from the grocery store, carrying 2 bags of food. She noticed a man leaning against the corner of her building, hands in his hoodie pockets. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just there. She thought nothing of it at first. Portland had its share of street people and late-night wanderers. The next night, the same man appeared, sitting on a bench near her building. His gaze followed her as she unlocked her door. A shiver ran down her spine, but she forced herself to shake it off. Probably coincidence, she muttered. Over the following week, Rachel began to notice him everywhere. On her way to the coffee shop, in the small park where she jogged, even outside the yoga studio she attended twice a week. Every time he seemed to be watching her, never approaching, never speaking, just observing. Rachel tried to tell herself she was imagining things, that maybe she was just stressed from work. But the unease grew into a gnawing anxiety. She started changing her routines, taking different routes, varying her jogging schedule, walking with her keys clenched between her fingers. Still, he appeared. Always. One evening, as she returned from work, she noticed a small piece of paper tucked under her doormat. Heart racing, she picked it up. It was blank, except for a single word written in neat, precise handwriting. Watching. Panic set in. Rachel called her friend Jenna and explained everything. Jenna's voice was calm but firm. Rachel, you need to call the police. This isn't something you should ignore. Rachel hesitated. She didn't want to be labeled paranoid or create trouble, but the paper under her door had shattered that illusion. She dialed 911, explained the situation, and a patrol car came that night to check her apartment and surrounding area. The officers were polite but didn't seem overly concerned. No one had seen the man recently. Keep your doors locked, one advised. If you see him again, call us immediately. For a few days, Rachel hoped the ordeal was over. She tried to maintain her normal life, but the paranoia clung to her like a shadow. She started leaving lights on all night, double-checking locks, even installing a small security camera over her front door. Then the emails started. At first, they were simple. You look beautiful today. I like the way you walk. Each email was unsigned, coming from an address she didn't recognize. At first, she tried to delete them, thinking maybe it was a spammer or a prank, but the messages kept coming, increasingly detailed. I saw you at the coffee shop at 2:15 p.m. You were wearing the blue scarf. Rachel's stomach turned. How could anyone know such specific details about her day? She hadn't mentioned her scarf to anyone, hadn't posted her schedule online. Panic escalated into fear. She stopped going out alone. She avoided her usual spots, even her favorite small grocery store. Friends noticed her withdrawal, but Rachel couldn't bring herself to explain. How could she describe the creeping horror of being watched without sounding insane? One evening, while Rachel was working late, she noticed movement on her security camera feed. A shadow lingered just beyond the doorway. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and called 911. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. But they found a note taped to her front door. I like that you called them. Makes it more fun. Rachel felt trapped in her own apartment. Every noise, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, the hum of the refrigerator, made her jump. Sleep became impossible. Her once familiar neighborhood had transformed into a labyrinth of fear. Days turned into weeks, and the stalking intensified. She began finding small gifts left outside her door. A single rose, a chocolate bar, a keychain from a store she had mentioned in passing months ago. Each gift was accompanied by a note, carefully typed or written in the same precise handwriting. I know what you like. Rachel's friends pleaded with her to stay with someone, but she refused. Something about leaving felt like surrendering to him, giving him control over her life. Instead, she fortified her apartment. Deadbolts, a reinforced door, motion sensors, security cameras in every corner. But no matter how secure she tried to be, he found ways to reach her. One night, she was awoken by the sound of whispering. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but the whispering grew louder, coming from outside her bedroom window. Heart pounding, she peeked through the blinds. The man stood in her backyard, just beyond the fence, smiling up at her. He raised a hand in a slow wave. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She didn't sleep the next night either. She began sleeping in short bursts, clutching a knife, listening for every sound. Her work suffered. Her friends became worried. Even her once healthy routine dissolved into a fog of anxiety and exhaustion. She tried to involve the police again, showing them every note, every email, every strange encounter. The officers took the reports seriously this time, increasing patrols around her apartment, but he never appeared when they were present, never left fingerprints, never made a sound. He was always just invisible until she saw him. Rachel began to change her online presence. She deleted social media accounts, removed photos, avoided posting anything personal. She moved her schedule, avoided her usual haunts, even changed her phone number. But the messages continued, now through anonymous accounts and untraceable emails. Each one grew darker. You can run, but you can't hide. Then came the calls, a low, static-filled voice, never saying much, just breathing or whispering her name. Rachel started answering with a trembling voice, pretending to be asleep or not home. Sometimes the calls came in the middle of the night, other times during her lunch break at work. The voice never threatened directly, but the intent was clear. He was always watching, always present, just beyond the reach of her senses. Sleep deprivation and fear began to take a toll. Rachel started seeing him in her mind even when she knew he wasn't there. Shadows on the wall became him. Every stranger on the street seemed to be watching. Friends urged her to get therapy, to move, to leave Portland entirely. She wanted to, but fear anchored her in place. One evening, she returned from a rare dinner out with a friend and found her apartment door ajar. Heart in her throat, she pulled her keys out of her pocket and slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the apartment looked untouched. Nothing seemed stolen. But then she saw it. A single note on the kitchen counter, written in the same precise hand. I was here. Rachel called the police immediately. They arrived within minutes, swept the apartment, and finally suggested she leave temporarily, stay with friends or family until they could increase patrols and investigate further. Reluctantly, Rachel agreed. She packed a bag, leaving behind most of her belongings. The next morning, she drove across state lines to her sister's house in Oregon, hoping distance would offer safety. For a while, it seemed to work. The emails stopped, the calls ceased. Rachel allowed herself to breathe again, to relax slightly. She even began to sleep normally, though nightmares of the man standing outside her window haunted her. Then, one morning, her sister handed her a small package that had arrived in the mail. Confused, Rachel opened it. Inside was a single keychain, identical to the one he had left outside her door months ago. Along with it was a note. I found you. Rachel's world fractured. The realization hit her. He had followed her. No matter how far she ran, no matter what precautions she took, he knew. He had crossed state lines to find her. She called the police immediately, but there was little they could do. The man had no criminal record, no prior charges, and every attempt to trace him led to dead ends. Terrified, Rachel began living with constant vigilance. Her sister's home became a fortress. She installed cameras, changed her routines, and avoided all unnecessary contact with the outside world. Even trips to the grocery store were accompanied by someone else. Yet, every day, she feared the moment she might see him again, standing silently, smiling, knowing that he had infiltrated her life completely. Weeks turned into months. Rachel became increasingly isolated, unable to trust anyone fully. Therapy helped somewhat, giving her strategies to cope, but the underlying fear never disappeared. Every shadow, every unexpected sound, every anonymous email or package was a reminder that he existed, that he was still out there, and that he could strike again at any moment. The stalking escalated in subtle ways. She began receiving photos of her leaving work, photos of her jogging, photos of her sister's home. Each image was time-stamped and perfectly framed, always showing her from angles that no passerby could easily achieve. The terror intensified, a constant pressure in her chest, and Rachel realized that she would never feel safe again. Eventually, she moved once more, taking a new identity, changing her appearance, even relocating to a different part of the country. But no matter how far she ran or how carefully she covered her tracks, the haunting thought remained. Someone had fixated on her. Someone had invaded every corner of her life. And somewhere, watching, waiting, the stalker knew exactly where she was. Years passed, but Rachel's life was never hers again. She lived in perpetual vigilance, always checking locks, always glancing over her shoulder, always wondering if the next note, the next call, the next shadow would bring him back into her world. Friends and family moved on, but Rachel remained trapped in a prison of fear. Her life dictated by the invisible presence of a man who had made it his mission to know everything about her. Even now, decades later, Rachel can't forget the feeling of walking alone at night, thinking she was safe, and seeing him there, just standing, just watching. She knows she was never alone, and she knows she may never truly escape. Story the end. It started the summer after I turned 26, when I moved into a small apartment complex in Tacoma, Washington. I had just left a bad relationship, found a new job at a veterinary clinic, and was trying to start fresh. The apartment wasn't much. Thin walls, creaky floors, an outdated kitchen, but it was mine. The rent was cheap, the neighbors quiet, and it was close enough to work that I could bike most days. For the first few weeks, I felt like I was finally getting my life back together. The first time I noticed him was a Tuesday afternoon in June. I had just gotten home from work and was unlocking my mailbox when a man in a gray hoodie walked past on the sidewalk. He didn't look at me, but something about his pace struck me. Too slow, deliberate. I remember his shoes were clean white sneakers, the kind that stood out against the wet pavement. He turned the corner, and I forgot about it for the rest of the day. 2 nights later, I saw him again. I was walking up the stairs to my apartment on the second floor, balancing a grocery bag, when I caught sight of someone standing near the edge of the parking lot. The light from the street lamp caught his face for half a second. Tall, maybe late 30s, clean shaven, wearing that same gray hoodie. He was looking toward my building. When I stopped to stare, he turned away and started walking. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he lived in the complex. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But when I went inside, I locked both the knob and the deadbolt for the first time since moving in. Over the next week, I noticed small things that unsettled me. The feeling of being watched from the parking lot, footsteps in the hallway late at night when I knew my neighbors were asleep. Once, I came home to find my doormat flipped upside down. It was the kind of thing that might have been an accident, but it didn't feel like one. I called my mom that night, told her about it, trying to sound casual. She said I should talk to the landlord, maybe ask if anyone new had moved in. I laughed it off, said I was probably imagining things, that living alone for the first time was just getting to me. Then the notes started. The first one was tucked under my windshield wiper when I left for work one morning. It was written on a torn piece of notebook paper in neat, almost formal handwriting. "You look beautiful when you wear your hair down." There was no name, no signature, just that line. I stood in the parking lot, heart pounding, scanning the rows of cars. No one was there. The blinds in the apartment opposite mine were half open, but I couldn't see anyone inside. I crumpled the note, threw it in the trash, and tried to convince myself it was some stupid prank. That night, I left my living room lamp on while I slept. The next morning, another note was slid under my door. "You shouldn't leave your light on all night. It makes it hard to sleep." I froze. Whoever it was, they'd been watching me. They knew my apartment, knew that I'd left that lamp on. I felt the room close in around me, every shadow a place someone could be hiding. I called the building manager, a tired man named Frank, who lived 2 doors down. He came by, looked at the notes, scratched his head, and said, "Probably some kids messing around. You'd be surprised what people do for kicks." I wanted to believe him. That evening, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across the street, a beat-up silver sedan. It was there when I left for groceries and still there when I came back. I could feel eyes on me as I carried the bags upstairs, but when I turned, the driver's seat was empty. I slept with my bedroom door locked that night, a chair wedged under the handle. By the end of that week, I started dreading coming home. I'd pull into the lot and scan every window, every parked car, waiting for something to move. I'd walk fast, keys between my fingers, heart pounding until I was inside. Then one night, as I was taking out the trash around 10, I heard it. The sound of footsteps behind me, quick and heavy. I spun around, trash bag swinging, but there was no one there, only the faint smell of cigarette smoke and the echo of retreating steps down the alley. When I got back inside, there was a new note taped to my door. "You shouldn't be out alone at night." The next morning, I went to the police. I showed them the notes, told them about the man in the hoodie. The officer on duty, a young woman named Hayes, listened patiently but said there wasn't much they could do without proof. "Keep your doors locked. Stay alert," she said. "Yeah, if you see him again, call us right away." It wasn't comforting. I bought a cheap security camera online and set it up facing my door. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third, the camera caught motion around 3 a.m. I opened the footage the next morning with trembling hands. The screen showed the hallway outside my door, dimly lit by the emergency exit light. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then, someone stepped into frame. It was him. The man in the gray hoodie. He stood directly in front of my door, head tilted slightly, as if listening. He stayed like that for almost 2 minutes. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, what looked like a small folded note. He slipped it under the door, looked straight at the camera, and smiled. The feed cut out right after that. I called the police again, shaking. Officer Hayes came to the apartment, watched the footage, and her expression darkened. "We'll file a report," she said. "I'll have a patrol car drive by at night. In the meantime, stay somewhere else if you can." I packed a bag and stayed at my friend Melissa's place across town for a few days. She thought I was overreacting until she saw the video. Then she made me promise not to go home alone again. When I finally returned the following week, the hallway was quiet. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution. For a few days, everything seemed normal again. No notes, no strange cars. I started to think maybe he'd gotten bored, moved on to someone else. Then one morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw something that made my stomach drop. The window above the sink was open, just an inch, but enough. I hadn't opened it. I was sure. The latch was still locked, but the frame looked scratched, like someone had tried to pry it open. I called the police again. They sent an officer to check it out. He didn't find fingerprints, said it could have been a maintenance worker, or maybe I'd forgotten, but I hadn't. That night, I pushed my couch against the window and slept with a knife under my pillow. 2 days later, I got another note. This time it was inside my apartment, sitting neatly on the kitchen table. You shouldn't have left. I don't remember dropping the glass I was holding, but I remember the sound of it shattering. I ran outside, called 911. The police came, searched every room, every closet, even the attic crawl space. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. They told me to stay somewhere else again. I moved out the next morning. Melissa helped me find a new place on the other side of town, a newer building, better security, coded entry. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving, just said it was for work. I didn't even give my new address to many people. For a few months, things were quiet. I started to sleep through the night again. I changed my phone number, got a new job at a different clinic, and tried to forget. But around November, I started getting calls from unknown numbers, always late at night. When I answered, no one spoke, just silence. Then a faint click. Once, I thought I heard breathing. I stopped answering, blocked every unknown number that called. But they kept coming, different area codes each time. One morning, I got an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of my new building. The picture had been taken from across the street. My apartment window was circled in red marker. I didn't even finish packing that time. I just grabbed my cat, my phone, my keys, and drove straight to the police station. They took the photo, the call logs, everything. Officer Hayes was there again. She looked genuinely worried. "He's escalating," she said quietly. "We'll assign a detective. You should stay with someone you trust for now." I stayed with my mom in Spokane for a while after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd find me no matter where I went. Every time I saw a man in a gray hoodie, my heart jumped into my throat. I started double locking every door, checking the back seat before getting into my car. Months passed. I didn't hear anything. No notes, no calls. I started therapy, tried to rebuild some sense of safety. The police never found him. They traced a few of the calls to prepaid phones bought with cash. The security footage from my old building never showed anything after that last night. It was like he'd vanished. Then, almost a year later, on the anniversary of the day I first found that note on my windshield, I got a letter in the mail. No return address again. My stomach turned when I saw the handwriting. It was the same neat, careful script. Inside it said, "You don't look happy anymore." Nah, maybe I shouldn't have left. There was no photo this time, no threat, just that. I took it straight to the police. They opened another file, but there was nothing to trace. No fingerprints, no usable DNA. It was mailed from a different state. That was 3 years ago. I've moved twice since then, changed my name legally, deleted every trace of my old life online. Still, sometimes I'll come home from work and find something small that makes my blood run cold. A flower on my doorstep, a note tucked into my windshield wiper with no handwriting, just a heart drawn in black ink. Every time it happens, I move again. And every time I tell myself it's just a coincidence. But deep down, I know the truth. He's still out there, watching, waiting, and he knows exactly where I am. Story the end. I wake up to my phone buzzing. 2:30 in the morning. I stare at the screen, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. 8 missed calls, no voicemail. I open the caller ID. There's no name, just an unknown number. My heart starts racing the moment I answer. "Hello," I whisper. No one says anything, just heavy breathing. I raise my phone higher, bring it closer to my ear. "Who is this?" Then a click. The line goes dead. I sit frozen on the edge of the bed, blankets half tangled, the ancient ceiling fan whipping quietly above me. I tell myself it's some drunk prank. I convince myself it could be a butt dial, but the crack in the back of my brain whispers, "This is not nothing." I hop out of bed, flipping on the lamp by the nightstand, checking the door to my apartment had locked. It had. I check the peephole. No one outside. I glance out the window at the parking lot for my building. Empty. I reassure myself, nothing here. I go back to sleep at 3 a.m., uneasy but able to doze off eventually. When the next morning comes, I try to act normal at work. I'm in Seattle, working at a small graphic design studio. My name is Mara. I sit in the open plan office, drinking coffee, the bitter taste of anxiety lingering. I tell myself I'm being paranoid. Then email. A single message in my inbox. I saw you last night. Subject line blank. I freeze. My fingers hover over the keyboard. My boss asks if I'm okay. I say yes. I clear my throat and open the email. Inside, a single photo. It's a snapshot taken through my bedroom window. The curtains are slightly open. In the photo, I'm asleep, lying on my side, face toward the window, my blanket up to my chin. I feel like I'm going to vomit. I want to scream. I feel every hair on the back of my neck stand upright. I look around. Coworkers typing, monitors humming. None of them have any idea. The photo is time-stamped. Night of the call, about 3:12 a.m. I hadn't heard any footsteps or knocks. I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't woken up. And now someone watched me. Someone took the photo. I close the email, minimize the window, dab tears from the corner of my eyes. I tell no one. I don't want coworkers worried. I don't want them thinking I'm losing it. I walk into the bathroom, stare at my reflection, the lines under my eyes darker than usual. I tell myself, okay, I'm safe now. I tell myself, just lock the windows better, maybe get blackout curtains. I try to push it from my mind. That night I sleep with the window closed and locked, my curtains fully drawn, my phone by my side. I wake again at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of muttering outside my window. I think it's the city, maybe someone shouting from the street, but then I hear a faint scrape, like someone shifting something heavy. I throw the covers off and step barefoot toward the window. City lights cast shadows across the blinds. I peek. There's nothing. I exhale. I tell myself I misheard it. I walk back to bed. Then I hear it again, closer this time. It's the sliding steel fire escape door, the door that leads from my back balcony to the window above. I freeze. My breath shallow. I grab my phone, camera open, the flash ready. Slowly I tiptoe across my small living room. I press my camera against the window, try to peek out. The fire escape stairs, stretching downward into darkness. A figure tries to force the door open. The mechanism refuses. They're jiggling it, grunting softly. I move the camera closer. The window is double pane. It's fogged. I can't see clearly. But I see a hooded shape with gloved hands. One hand claws the door frame. The other holds something, a phone maybe, to photograph me? I don't know. Time stops until I hear the click of the lock finally giving way. My stomach drops. The door creaks open. The fire escape rails graze the concrete floor. The figure steps through, silent, shadow-like. I open the blinds. The flash goes off. The figure stumbles back. My light catches a mask. White, expressionless. They turn toward the window, sense my presence. My heart jolts. I press record. "Who are you?" I whisper. The figure doesn't answer. Instead, they climb the stairs back up and out of sight. I stand there frozen, the camera recording. I don't move until I'm sure they're gone. The next morning, the photo from last night joins the first. Another email. Subject blank. You don't hide from me. Attached, a photo of my curtains gently parted and the masked figure inside my apartment, standing over my bed, blurry but unmistakable. I know I should call the police now, but every time I imagine telling them, I feel shame. I imagine they'll ask, why didn't you hear the door? Why didn't you wake up? I imagine them not taking me seriously. I imagine being told maybe it's a mental breakdown. I hate admitting all this. I keep it to myself. I stop sleeping at my apartment. I go to a friend's place. My friend Shayna lives across town. I crash there for a few nights. I leave city lights on. I sleep with the phone in hand. Every creak, every sigh of wind outside the window triggers a panic attack. My commute to work is consumed by anxiety. I glance at strangers on the bus, thinking I might see the mask. The hoodie. One evening, I tell Shayna everything. I show her the emails, the photos. She turns pale. She pushes me to talk to the cops. She insists. I finally agree. I call 911. I say, I think someone's been stalking me. They dispatch a unit. I give the officer the emails, the screenshots, the recording from the night. The officer's polite but clipped. He says they'll check the area. We'll keep an eye on things. he says. Install security cameras, keep your doors locked. I thank him and leave, feeling lighter but also more exposed. That night, I return to my apartment. I place a padlock on the fire escape door inside. I install a camera pointed at the balcony and window. I tell myself, I'm protecting myself now. I'm strong. I'm safe. The blinds are thicker, the curtains triple lined. I tell myself I'm done being afraid, but fear doesn't go away. About 2 weeks later, I get a text message from an unknown number. It's short. Nice place you've got. I don't reply. I screenshot it, send it to the detective handling the case. They say they'll look into it. Meanwhile, I avoid being alone at night. I stay away from my apartment after dark. I take the bus to Shayna's and sleep there again. One Friday night, I decide to attend a small art show. I sketch suburbs and city corners, little scenes of normality. It's at a gallery in Capitol Hill. I leave early. The air is cool. Autumn. Leaves on the sidewalk, lone figures in the street. I glance at my phone, 10:45 p.m. I walk quickly back to the bus stop. I notice I'm being followed. At first, I think maybe it's coincidence, someone else walking my direction. Then I notice the steps behind me match mine exactly. I step faster. They step faster. I turn a corner and pick up speed. So does the person behind me. I glance back under streetlight. The masked hoodie figure again. My chest seizes. I duck into a convenience store. The stranger follows. I press up against the door and plead silently with the clerk to distract them. But the clerk doesn't notice. The figure appears in the doorframe, mask still on, head low. They stand there for a moment, stare at me, then leave. My legs nearly collapse. The clerk asks if I'm okay. I squeak, yes. I buy a bottle of water. I walk out. I look behind. No one. I sprint to the bus stop, board the bus, hands trembling. At home later, I don't take a shower. I don't sleep. I sit on the couch, lights all on. The camera is pointed at the balcony. I watch the live feed. Midnight comes. I see nothing. One comes. Nothing. Two, though, one frame shows the balcony door handle twist, slowly. I freeze. The footage catches the masked figure, gloved hands. The padlock is clipped. They pull a small tool, pry the lock. I watch the clip in horror, then quick forward. Black. The next footage shows the window blinds move. I have no words. I call 911. I tell them live feed shows a break-in. They dispatch urgent. I hide in the bathroom with my phone. I hear faint noises downstairs, then silence, then footsteps above my head. I grip the door handle. The policeman bursts in. I jump up and show him the screen. They shout for backup while I'm sobbing, pointing at the figure on screen. By the time backup arrives, the intruder is gone. The pad's open, the window cracked. Outside, officers search the hallway, the rooftop, the fire escape stair. No one found. I'm told they'll patrol. They mark it as a home invasion attempt, suspicion of stalking. I leave my apartment again, pack a bag, stay at Shayna's house again. I can't risk being alone. My job gives me remote access so I can work from Shayna's. I feel safer, but I don't sleep. Every shadow triggers me. Every email I have ever received, I look at again. I find something I missed, a timestamp in the second photograph that shows I moved in 3 months ago. How long had this person been watching me? How many nights? I delete old photos and files that could give them any information, my address, my previous employer, my travel itinerary. Then comes the day I get something mailed. A plain brown envelope with no return address. Inside, a picture of me at the gym. Sweat on my shirt, hair pulled back mid-stride on the treadmill. I'd been there that night around 7 p.m. The picture was taken from the parking garage, vantage point from above. I recognize it instantly. The envelope also contains a note. Nice workout. You don't get away from me. My blood runs cold. I keep the envelope in a plastic bag, drive to the detective. They take the evidence. We spend an hour looking through footage from the gym's cameras, parking garage, nothing definitive. The gym says someone may have been there after closing, but they don't have clear view of the garage stairs adjacent to my vehicle. From that day on, my life is consumed by him, by someone. I don't know his name. I don't know what he wants. I know he loves the fear. I know I hate his silence. One morning, I wake to my front door wide open. I live in a fourth-floor apartment. The fire escape door is locked. The window is open. The curtains fly gently in the breeze. The lock on the door is broken. I stand at the threshold, phone in hand, stun of shock piercing me. No one inside the apartment. I call the detective right away. They rush out. The apartment is searched. Nothing obvious missing. but everything feels changed. Like the air smells colder, the walls thinner. My safe is ajar. I open it. Money gone, personal documents gone. The detective says, looks like he came in through the back, left through the path he came, tried not to be noticed. I move out that same day. I grab what I need, tell building management I'm leaving. I stay with Shayna until I secure a new place, 1 bedroom in a gated complex in Bellevue. I change my phone number, change my address with only the bare minimum of people informed. I install a full security system, cameras, door sensors, smart locks. I tell myself I'm rebuilding. I'm reclaiming my life. But the stalking doesn't stop. At the new place, I get a text. Checked out your new view. I nearly fall off my chair. I move the curtains. The balcony shows the neighbor's window across, but no one's there. The detective says the texts are being sent from disposable phones. They're hard to trace. They advise logging everything, avoiding patterns. I start traveling more for work. I spend nights in hotels. Everywhere I go, airport, hotel lobby, I glance over my shoulder. I look around dinner tables. I avoid the gym. I avoid the quiet. I avoid being alone. My art, once a place of refuge, becomes toxic, triggering. I stop drawing for a while. Then one day I go to the grocery store in the afternoon. I fill my cart, scan the shelves. At checkout, I glance up at the security monitor. Then I look beside me. The masked hoodie is standing in line behind me. We make eye contact. I drop my head. He smirks. My chest feels like it's going to burst. I pay and dash out, nearly knocking over a display. He just watches. He lets it happen. Outside, I hop into my car, lock the doors. My hands shake. I try to breathe. It's real. I call the detective. He says he's escalating. Stay in public. Don't go anyplace alone. We'll try to find the phone account. I listen, though I don't know what else to do. Weeks later, I get another package. Inside, a small key, plain, no markings, and another photo of me on my balcony. The key belongs to a lock I didn't know about, the rooftop door in the complex. The photo shows the door ajar, the key ready. That night, I don't sleep at all. I stay in the car outside the complex. I watch as a figure crawls through the rooftop door. The camera feeds my phone silently. I snap pictures. I call the detective again. They are slower arriving this time. They finally confront the intruder on the roof. He flees. They pick up some tools, gloves, black backpack, but he escapes again. The detective gives me a safety plan, change residence once more, go away for a while, cooperate with towing out of my comfort zone. I book a flight to Chicago for 2 weeks for a conference, tell myself it's a vacation. Chicago is noisy. It's different. For 2 weeks, I feel almost normal. I draw again. I eat deep dish pizza and walk the lakeshore at dusk. I look at the city lights. I laugh at a joke by a coworker. I even flirt quietly. I tell myself, maybe I'll be okay. Maybe he stops. I fly back to Seattle. My phone lights up as I'm landing. Welcome back. I freeze. I wipe tears in the taxi to the apartment. I tell the driver a wrong address so I'm not too traceable. At the door to the apartment, I pause. I glance at the lobby camera. I get inside, lock the door, shut the blinds. A week passes. I tell myself, this is safe. I almost believe it. Then I get a call from the detective. He says, we found him. My pulse races. We have a suspect at a motel just north of Seattle. He's been living under a different name. We found credit card receipts near your gym, your old apartment, the new complex. We have video of him walking near your balcony. We believe he's your stalker. I feel relief, but it's fragile. I ask, will he come to trial? Can I finally stop this? He says yes, but these things rarely end cleanly. He warns that even if they arrest him, it may not end the messages, the fear, the feeling of being watched. He says they'll sting operate. They'll place a hidden camera in the motel room, wait for him to show evidence. Then they'll move in. The next evening I get the message. I'm done waiting. My phone lights up again. I don't show it to the detective yet. I'm too afraid. Then I get a voicemail. It's breathing. Heavy. Then my name. Mara. A low voice. Then nothing. The phone drops the call. I drive to the detective. I show him the voicemail. He says he'll make it an aggravating factor. He'll expedite the warrant. 2 nights later, at 4:15 a.m., I wake to my doorbell. I glance at the time. I don't move. I listen. There's no one outside, but I hear the fire escape stairs creak. I reach my phone. I call 911. I tell them there's someone at my door. They tell me to go to a safe place. I go into the bathroom, lock it, sit on the tub edge, phone in hand, trembling. I hear footsteps walking slowly across the balcony floor. The window behind me rattles. I know the intruder is right outside my window. The camera feed shows it too. Masked figure crouched, gloved hand on the frame. I hear a cough, then a whisper. You can't hide forever. It reverberates through the glass. I cover my head, sobbing. Then I hear sirens outside. Police break in from the stairwell. They shine lights. The figure flees. One officer chases while others clear the apartment. They find evidence near the window: shoe prints, glove impressions, fingerprint smudges. I sit on the bathroom floor, shaking for hours until they say it's safe. They tell me suspect has been arrested a few blocks away. They took him at gunpoint. They found the mask, the phone, the key he mailed, and other items tying him to my case. I feel relief. I cry. The detective says, "You can start healing now." But healing doesn't simply happen overnight. In the weeks that follow, the suspect appears in court. I sit behind a glass screen. He stares at me in the dock, cold, emotionless. He doesn't speak except to answer questions. I suffer flashbacks. I have panic attacks. I start therapy. I tell the counselor everything: the calls, the photos, the intrusion. I stop living in fear, though I still carry the burden. I move again. A different city, a new job. I keep the windows locked. I sleep with a white noise machine. I still glance over my shoulder. I still check under the car before getting in. Some nights I wake remembering the mask, the footsteps, the knowing eyes behind the mask. But I also laugh again. I let myself draw silly little comics about cats, flowers, anything. I build walls of safety around me. One day I receive the final notice. The judge sentences the stalker to years behind bars. Watching that gavel fall, I feel a weight lift. But I also feel changed, something cracked in me. The world doesn't feel as safe as it once did. But I survived. I reclaimed my life. I still get residual anxiety when a call comes from an unknown number. I still jump at the sound of footsteps on the balcony. I still shut my curtains early. I still live with the memory of seeing that masked figure standing over my bed. But I am no longer frozen. I move forward. Story. The end. She thought the first few signs were just coincidences. Her name, Alexa Moore, was printed clearly on her mailbox, and the suburban neighborhood she lived in felt safe enough. But when she started seeing the same black SUV at the end of her street every evening, a cold sense of unease crept in. At first, she convinced herself it was just a neighbor returning home late or someone lost. But it happened 3 nights in a row, the SUV always there, engine idling silently, dark windows concealing the driver. The unease grew when small things started going missing inside her house. Not valuable items, just ordinary things like a favorite coffee mug or a single glove. She initially blamed herself, thinking maybe she'd misplaced them, but when she found tiny scratch marks near her door lock, she began to suspect she wasn't alone. Alexa worked as a graphic designer from home, which meant she spent most of her days alone. Her best friend, Jenna, told her not to worry, that paranoia could take over when you were isolated. But Jenna didn't live in a place where people could linger outside your windows unnoticed. It escalated on a Friday evening. Alexa had stayed late at her desk working on a client's project when she looked up and saw the reflection of someone standing just outside the window. Her heart stopped. She dropped her pencil, and the figure moved out of sight. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no trace of anyone. They suggested installing cameras, saying that unless the person was caught in the act, it would be difficult to prove anything. Alexa did install cameras, but she kept them simple at first, just one at her front door and another pointing at the driveway. That night, she reviewed the footage and froze. There was a man, hunched in a dark hoodie, standing at her front gate, looking directly at the camera. He didn't move much, just watched. Then he pulled out something from his pocket and pressed it against the lens. The screen went black. Her sleep became impossible. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the hall made her jump. She started locking every window, every door, triple-checking even the ones she never used. But it didn't matter. The sense of being watched never left. A week later, she came home to find a note slipped under her door. "You can't hide. I see everything." The handwriting was jagged, uneven, like the person who wrote it was shaking with rage or excitement. Panic set in. She called the police again, but they only took a report, telling her there was no immediate threat. They said unless he made physical contact, there wasn't much they could do. Alexa's family urged her to stay with them for a while, but She was determined not to abandon her home. She tried changing her routines, taking different routes to the grocery store, and was working at a cafe occasionally to break the pattern. But it seemed like no matter what she did, he knew. He always appeared just out of sight in the corner of her vision, or parked outside in the same black SUV. The stalker's obsession escalated when her neighbors reported strange occurrences around their homes. Packages moved, lights flickered, and most disturbing of all, small symbols drawn on the pavement outside. Only Alexa's neighbors seemed to notice. They didn't know her yet, but they could sense something was wrong. One night, while reviewing her security footage, she saw him inside her backyard. He moved carefully, almost ritualistically, circling the perimeter. She called the police immediately, but when they arrived, the man had vanished. The officers suggested she install motion sensors, but Alexa realized that was only a temporary solution. This person was methodical, patient, and watching her like a hawk. The breaking point came when Alexa returned home one afternoon and found her front door unlocked. She was sure she had locked it. Inside, the living room was untouched, but on her kitchen counter sat a single photograph of herself. She didn't recognize it at first, then realized it had been taken that morning while she left for a walk. He had been inside her home, uninvited, in broad daylight. She moved to a safer apartment downtown, thinking distance would help. But the stalker's reach was far greater than she imagined. Letters arrived in the mail, meticulously folded, sometimes just one at a time, with messages like, "I know where you are," or "I'm always close." Each letter contained small, unnerving details about her life. What she had eaten for lunch, what she wore when she went jogging, even the names of people she met at cafes. The police tried to trace the letters, but he was careful. He always mailed them from different areas, making it nearly impossible to track him. Alexa started keeping a journal, documenting every encounter, every letter, every sighting of the SUV. Her friends tried to convince her to stay elsewhere indefinitely, but she refused to live in fear. Her paranoia eventually consumed her. She installed cameras in every room, even in the bathroom and bedroom. The obsession began to take a toll on her work, her friendships, and her mental health. Yet the stalker didn't relent. One night, she woke to the sound of someone in her apartment. Her heart racing, she crept toward the bedroom door and saw the silhouette of a man in the hallway. He froze as he noticed her. Before she could react, he bolted. She chased him into the stairwell, but he vanished into the city night. The police arrived, but again, he was gone. After months of relentless stalking, the man escalated further. Alexa discovered small devices hidden around her apartment, microphones, a tiny camera hidden behind a smoke detector. Everything she did, everything she said was being recorded. She realized she wasn't just being watched. Her life was being meticulously cataloged. The stalker's obsession seemed to culminate when she received a video on a USB drive. It showed her walking through her apartment earlier that day, filmed from inside her own walls. She couldn't fathom how he had gotten in. The video ended with the man standing in the corner of the living room, his face finally visible. Pale, gaunt, with a twisted smile. She recognized him. It was her neighbor from the first building she had lived in months ago, someone she barely noticed. The police were finally able to arrest him after she installed a hidden camera and caught him trying to tamper with it. When they searched his apartment, they found walls plastered with photos of Alexa, letters he had collected over months, and detailed logs of her routines. He had been living nearby the entire time, meticulously planning every move, every encounter. Alexa moved again, this time to another state, far from anyone who could recognize her. She changed her name legally and tried to reclaim her life. Yet, even years later, she sometimes woke in the middle of the night, certain she could see the shadow of a man in her peripheral vision. She never fully trusted anyone again, always looking over her shoulder, haunted by the memory of the black SUV, the letters, and the relentless obsession that had invaded every corner of her life. Story, the end. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it didn't even seem like a big deal. I was walking to my apartment in Chicago from the train station. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and I felt the unmistakable prickling on the back of my neck that told me someone was watching. I turned around quickly, expecting to see a group of drunks or maybe some random guy walking his dog, but The street was empty. Just the flickering street lamp, the sound of distant traffic, and me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was paranoia. That would turn out to be the first of many mistakes. At first, it was subtle. I started noticing strange coincidences. The same black sedan parked across the street every night when I got home. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Chicago streets are full of cars, after all. But then I started seeing the same figure in the car, a man, always wearing a dark hoodie, head down, hands on the steering wheel. Sometimes he'd be reading a newspaper, sometimes he'd be just staring straight ahead as if waiting for me to appear. I told myself it wasn't real, maybe a tenant from a nearby building, maybe someone else's regular habit. But then came the phone calls. At first, they were innocuous, a click, and then silence. I would answer once, just to say hello, but no one would speak. Then the calls became more persistent, sometimes twice a night. Once I answered, and I swear I could hear someone breathing, slow and deliberate, like they were trying to remain quiet but couldn't control it. I told my roommate Mike about it. He laughed, of course. Maybe it's a telemarketer or a wrong number, he said. But when he started noticing the car outside too, he got quiet. One night, he came home to find a note slipped under our apartment door. It was handwritten in messy, uneven letters. "I know where you are." We called the police, but they were polite and dismissive. "Without a direct threat or physical evidence, there's not much we can do," the officer said. I kept thinking about that black sedan, the man in the hoodie. Why me? Why me? Why our apartment? The situation escalated slowly, almost methodically. At first, it was little things. A cracked window that I was sure I had locked, a small scratch in the paint on my car door that I hadn't noticed before, items slightly moved in the apartment. Every time I thought it was paranoia, I found another detail that made me feel like a fool for doubting myself. One night, I got home later than usual. Around 1 a.m., I parked, and my headlights reflected something on my front door. A single rose pinned to the door with a pushpin. No note, no signature. Just a rose. That was the night I realized this wasn't random. It was personal. Someone was watching me, learning my habits, tracking my movements. I started changing my routine. I left earlier, took different streets, even started walking in the opposite direction to see if anyone was following. I saw him, of course. Always in the shadows, sometimes watching from a distance, other times closer than I expected, just standing, waiting. There was an almost casual patience to him, like a predator that knows exactly how long it can linger before striking. The calls became worse. They weren't just silence anymore. I would hear my own footsteps echoing, faint, that like someone was following me through the phone line. Breathing again, sometimes whispering my name. I installed cameras inside the apartment, locked everything, got a panic button for my phone. Nothing seemed to stop him. One morning, I woke to find a note on my windshield. "You sleep. I watch." I panicked, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grab my coffee. I called the police again, but like before, they told me there wasn't enough evidence. I couldn't even explain how I knew it was him. I tried to document everything, keeping a journal of times, dates, behaviors, every instance of the car, every phone call. My life became consumed by fear. I stopped going out, stopped talking to friends, stopped leaving the apartment unless I absolutely had to. My relationship with Mike strained. He tried to help, but even he didn't want to live in constant fear. Then one day I found a hidden camera in my living room. Tiny, almost invisible. I don't know how long it had been there. I took it apart, found a memory card with hundreds of photos, me sleeping, eating, walking around my apartment, even brushing my teeth. I threw the pieces into the garbage and started thinking about leaving Chicago. I had to get away, but he anticipated it. One evening, I returned home early, hoping to catch him in the act, only to find the apartment completely untouched, normal. I thought maybe I had imagined the camera, but when I checked my bedroom window, there was a small package taped to the outside ledge. Inside, another memory card, hundreds more photos. I realized then that leaving wasn't an option. He had invaded my life completely. He knew me in ways I didn't even know myself. And then came the most terrifying realization. He was inside my apartment. Not physically at that moment, but he had been. He had a way of entering without me noticing. I began staying awake for days, half barely sleeping, watching the apartment like a hawk. Every shadow, every sound made me jump. I called in favors from friends, had them come stay with me at odd hours. I even tried to confront the landlord about changing the locks, but he brushed me off. It was like everyone else's normalcy made them blind to what was happening to me. Then one night, it happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing footage from the hidden cameras I had installed after finding the original one. I thought I was alone. I heard a soft click. My heart stopped. The bedroom door creaked open slowly. I froze, unable to move, thinking maybe it was a nightmare. But then I heard it, breathing, close, deliberate. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I ran. I didn't even grab my phone. I just ran out of the apartment into the cold night, barefoot, barely aware of the pain. I didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. The staff were shocked to see me, covered in scratches, hair tangled, eyes wild. I called 911 from there. This time I begged them to stay, to send multiple units. When they arrived, we went back to the apartment. They found signs of forced entry, everything neatly clean, but it was obvious someone had been there recently. Footprints in the dust behind the couch, fingerprints on the inside of windows. They finally understood. They couldn't catch him, not yet, but at least they believed me. I didn't stay in Chicago much longer. I moved across the country, somewhere I thought he couldn't find me. For a while, it worked. I started trying to rebuild a normal life, cautiously, always looking over my shoulder, never trusting silence. Then came the texts. I had blocked all unknown numbers, all social media. But somehow he found a way. One afternoon, my phone vibrated with a new message. "I like your hair like that." I had just dyed it the night before. Panic surged through me. He was closer than I thought, closer than I wanted to admit. I changed my number, moved again, tried to leave a digital footprint so tiny it was untraceable. But each time I felt safe, I would get another message, another photo, another subtle sign he knew where I was, what I was doing. Months later, I tried living normally again. I got a small apartment, got a new job, tried to make friends. I thought maybe he had given up, maybe he had lost interest. But then I started noticing it in public, the subtle glances from strangers who looked a little too interested, the same black hoodie in a coffee shop window, the same car parked a block away from my apartment. I learned the patterns, the patience, the obsession. I learned that fear could be a constant companion, shaping your life, twisting your every decision. He didn't have to strike. The mere knowledge that he could was enough. I started sleeping with knives by the bed, cameras all around, panic buttons ready. I even slept with my apartment door unlocked sometimes so I could see if anyone would enter. He never fully revealed himself. He was careful, calculated, and horrifyingly patient. I became paranoid, yes, but every instinct I had screaming, "He's there," was correct. I would catch glimpses sometimes, a shadow in the corner of a store, and a reflection in a dark window, a whisper in the night that sounded like my own voice calling back at me. The last time I saw him directly was outside a grocery store. I was in line, and I felt it, that presence, heavy and suffocating. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing across the street, hoodie up, hands in pockets, watching me. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. I felt my stomach turn. I wanted to scream, to run, but he disappeared into the crowd before I could move. Since then, I haven't seen him face to face. But I know he's there. I know he's always somewhere, somewhere close enough to see me if he wants to. I still get the occasional text or photo or note, just enough to remind me that I am being watched, that every step I take is being tracked, cataloged, studied. I've considered moving again, but I've realized that it doesn't matter where I go. He could find me anywhere. He doesn't need to. He's patient. He's clever. He knows me better than anyone, maybe better than I know myself. And no amount of police reports, cameras, or security can stop someone who has already entered your life in ways you can't even see. I live my life cautiously now, every decision weighed, every action measured. I smile at friends, I go to work, I live, but always under the shadow of someone watching, always with the knowledge that I am not alone. Some nights I lie awake, listening to the silence, waiting for the telltale sound, the soft click of a door, the faint shuffle of feet, the slow, deliberate breathing that tells me he's close. And I know that one day maybe I won't notice him until it's too late. Until that day, I live under the constant, suffocating awareness that someone knows everything about me, that someone waits, that someone is patient, and that someone will never stop. Story, the end.